Over. Hey guys, what's up? Yeah, it's been a while. It's not actually thinking about it. The last, I think it's been 2.5 weeks approximately, has been kind of crazy for me. Considering the last, I would say even year, because I've basically been in something of a neat for the last year or so. At least, like I wouldn't find anything permanent. And what's interesting is, I've been talking with a lot of, because now I'm out in public now, just as part of the job, and I've been talking with a lot of Leafs, and pretty much everybody within my age range down to younger Zoomers have the same story. It's like the last 2 years has been a total disaster for trying to find anything. Most of these guys are lucky to have parents they can live with, but so that's why I've been a little bit scarce, along with my mic breaking. Yeah, and this mic, I got it from China. It has some weird-ass name. Fine. Sort of weird Chinese names. And it took a while to ship, but I only paid 50 leaf bucks, which is like $35 US or something, for it. And in the testing that I've done so far, it seems to actually be significantly better than the mic I had before. So, and I know that there's been quite a bit of news that has happened, right? Like the Henry Nowak thing in the UK, and then the shit going down in Belfast, which those are my people, by the way. My mother's side is Ulster Scot, ethnically. Well, a mix of Ulster Scot and English. So those are my people chimping out there. We're premier chimps. But to be honest, I haven't really been paying that much attention to the news. I've been paying more attention to my observations in real life and just noticing what different people are doing. Because, well, I mean, first of all, it's more directly relevant. And, this isn't really a political stream per se. It's more of a BP stream, right? That's what's more important. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, which I'm going to have to amend the title a little bit because it's not really relevant now, what I titled, compared to when I had written it. I wanted to talk a little bit more about my observations just in the normie especially with regards to the age pill. And what you notice when you know that you are past a certain age category for women, and it doesn't even matter whether you can actually get access to those women or not, like in terms of if you could actually get a date out of them or whatever, but more so just knowing that they are beyond the pale socially. Like it wouldn't, even if they were interested in you, you're socially beyond the pale now just due to the social norms with regards to age gaps, right? And sort of, it's like an age pill sort of thing, and having to acknowledge becoming an old cell as opposed to just being a young cell, And I'm expecting this stream is going to be a little bit quieter because it's on a weekday, so most wagies are waging. But I will definitely, because I see, somebody say, upload the stream for us who can't listen live. Yeah, I always make sure the stream gets uploaded. There was one section in, I think it was the previous stream I did, where I edited it in the YouTube editor just to remove a specific section that showed my location on a map. I'm not all that concerned about like getting doxxed and having people send pizzas to my place or whatever, but I think just for anything that you do on the internet, especially if you have politically controversial opinions, it's probably better to avoid having the more detailed information out if you can avoid it. So, and I think that caused a weird uploading issue with that, because I saw it, like there was a separate copy of the stream that got uploaded as a YouTube video. It was really strange. Yeah, where are my wizards at? We're all here. This is the wizard stream. I might if I ever take this in a different direction where I like split the streams based on topics, I'll make one called the wizard stream where we just talk about being old all day. These red pill copers who think life begins at 30 couldn't be more wrong. Mark Hansen, you are 100% correct. I would actually say the opposite. I would say that that's when it starts to... Look, I'm not somebody who thinks that you cease to exist as an active person in life past the age of 30. But what I will say, and what I have noticed, is that the windows of opportunity close. They recede. They shut down as you get further and further away. And I would actually say, and it's funny because you'll see a lot of people, they'll talk about like economic opportunities, which this is true, like trying to start a career in something at 35 versus 20, you're going to face more complications and more challenges, but it's not impossible if you have the right stuff. Whereas when it comes to dating, I would actually say that the window of opportunity is much narrower. Like I would say now, even if I were to go somewhere like C or somewhere like Latin America, I mean, it's a little more complicated there because if you guys remember the C-Maxing stream I did, or not C-Maxing, excuse me, the Latin American stream I did, we had a guy on there called Elzak who's 39 and he's Peruvian, and from how he describes it, and he's not by any means like a Chadriguez or whatever, and he's not rich either. He's like does well. He's tall for Peruvian, which is unusual. I think he's like 5'10" or something, but he was saying like he had plenty of options in terms like it didn't recede for him. So there are cultural differences there. But even then, you still are going to face more scrutiny if you are in your 30s or particularly, I think that the real wall starts to hit you at 40 plus. That's when it starts to become awkward trying to date women in their 20s, let's say. You can still get away with the larger age gap in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, and probably even in East Asia than you could in Europe and Western countries, of course, but it varies. Talk to women from C and they see tons of old Western men with younger wives. Age pill hasn't hit those places yet. Yeah, I mean, there's an economic element to that as well. Like, women are more holistic in those countries out of necessity. You know, if they're brought into our environment and they grow up here, they're going to adopt the same attitudes that our women adopt, because it's not like our women have some sort of biological imperative to behave a certain way, right? Well, I mean, they do, but it's not like it's unique to them, right? This is just what happens when the economic pressures and also security pressures are lifted. It gets a lot worse. Because these elements, they don't have to consider them anymore. You know, like at least in a lot of these, well, I mean, Southeast Asia is not dangerous, right? But Latin American countries, there is the element of security where having a man around who can provide a safe environment for you is actually valuable. But, yeah. And yeah, exactly, Holy Rob. That's exactly what I was saying. The problem with Latin America is that there's so much crime that the women are kind of afraid of being without protection. Now, that cuts both ways, because if you're a foreigner, especially if you're white in these countries, I think that can also put a target on your back in some ways, because people will see you and they'll assume, often correctly, that you have resources and that, for example, kidnapping you and holding you for ransom could be a way of extracting money out of you or your family. So that's the other issue. Tails said that mid-20s is basically past the peak of dating for most. I would say for white women in Europe, yeah. Actually, it's interesting because the place I'm working at now, my boss is 35, and he's white, and he has a wife that he recently married who has and this is, again, you hear this very commonly, has a kid from a previous marriage. They have a kid now as well, both girls. And I mean, he doesn't seem bothered by it, but something that I've noticed with these kind of guys, and this is something that I really dread getting into or having happen to me, is that because this guy is not an inky by any stretch, just to be clear. Like, when he was a teenager and in his 20s, he went to plenty of parties, he had plenty of girlfriends and whatever other arrangements, you know, so he's not like that. But what you see with these millennials is they'll hit their 30s and then like they'll realize, oh, I need, like, because we know that women do this, right? Like this is like a core doctrine of RP, is that by their 30s women shift priorities and try and lock down a man to pop a kid out before it's too late. A lot of millennial men sort of do something similar, because it just, like the way he described it to me, we were just talking about how he met his wife, it just sort of happened to him where he was like, yeah, I just woke up one day and suddenly I had a kid and now I have all this responsibility, you know, and it's not, like, he seems to like his wife. I've never met his wife. He seems to like her, but what you could tell from that relationship, just by how that he would talk about her, is that this is much more like a situation where he finds her attractive and he finds her decently tolerable to be around, like like not a pain to be around. But there's no real, what we would call like romantic love there. And a lot of these guys, I would say this entire generation of older millennials, these are the marriages and or relationships that they end up settled into in their 30s. And that to me is kind of like, when you think about the amount of energy that women take, which if you ever do get into a relationship with a woman, there's something that doesn't really get discussed very much in our spheres. But one of the major factors that you have to deal with that you don't realize, because you're so focused on, the way I've described it is, you're so focused on qualifying for the race that you forget that there's a whole other race that you have to run. Like, once you get qualified, it's not like you finish the race and this is your prize. You then have to manage, because with women are typically emotionally unstable relative to men. I mean, like, even normal women are emotionally unstable relative to men. You'll need to constantly reassure them about their anxieties. You'll need to usually finance their lifestyle in some way or another. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean beta bucksing in the sense that you're paying for everything. But women, even like non-beta bucks relationships, women will expect you to buy things that she wants as a token of your affection for her. Like, there's a lot of those elements that that I think get ignored because we're so busy and focused on trying to qualify. Like, a lot of normie millennials that never had problems dating, they're not satisfied with their arrangements in their relationships. Because it is what I described. It boils down to this. It's like, yeah, you have a woman that you can have sex with, and that pressure is relieved. But then you're dealing with all these other aspects, and this isn't really a woman you're that into either. Like, there's nothing really special about this. You know, like this guy, the guy I work for, I actually really like him. He seems like a really decent, nice guy, especially considering the industry. Because this is kind of right now I'm working in roofing right now, which is the kind of guys you typically get in those industries are not going to be super agreeable people. I'll just put it that way. But he's quite friendly and good-natured. So I actually do like him personally. But you just realize that this is the future, and this is his future. He sort of accepted it. And I remember when he described his relationship to me, the first thing that came to my mind was, couldn't be me. Couldn't be me. I couldn't deal with that. I think that would actually drive me fucking bonkers, having to deal with that with a woman that I'm not romantically attracted to. Which, I think that's actually much more specific than sexual attraction. Like, most women can be, as long as they're thin, they're usually in some degree sexually attractive. Romantically attractive women, it's sort of like a non-sexual thing. It's very different. Normies are scared of being single. They'll stay in horrible relationships or dead bedroom just to not be alone. Yeah, I think that the large factor there is, for a lot of people, and maybe this is a little bit self-aggrandizing in some way, right? Because obviously I'm considering myself, and I'm sure most of you in here, we're the elect in the sense that we're introspective. We do a lot of metacognition, as they say, which means thinking about what we're thinking and why we're thinking what we're thinking, trying to understand ourselves on a intellectual level and psychological level. Whereas most normies, they exist in a sort of lower stage of or lower form of consciousness where everything, and this isn't IQ gated, by the way. This includes like high tier, like white collar doctors, lawyers, where they don't really think deeply about anything, and any intelligence that they have is entirely instrumental. It's instrumental and focused towards acquiring the resources they need to achieve whatever their personal desires are. And it's funny because there was this video that is like one of the early YouTube style video monologues that one of these white nationalists, early white nationalist leaders in America called William Pierce, put out. And if you don't know William Pierce, he was the guy who, if you ever hear Day of the Rope as a term or whatever, he developed this idea with his book, The Turner Diaries. So he was a really old school white nationalist. And he would talk about lemmings, as he described them, as basically these people, and he is describing whites, that are entirely motivated by just these personal desires. And that if you could just manipulate access to those personal desires, you could basically control these people. And that's how most people are. You know? And one of the most important things that I took away from the book Brave New World, which I don't know if they still assign it now, because you know how politicized, ironically, how politicized English literature classes are. But when I was in high school, we got assigned Brave New World as one of our reading books. And I remember one of the things I took away from it that I found was most important was the main character's name is Bernard Marx. And so the way that Brave New World works is that it's like a genetic caste system where you have alpha pluses, alphas, betas, and then gammas, I believe. And they're all bred to perform certain roles. Obviously, the alphas are the most genetically superior. And Bernard Marx is an alpha plus, which is like the elite within the alphas. But apparently, and the way that they reproduce, by the way, is through artificial conception. So it's like engineered from top to bottom. And the story in the book is that when he was being conceived by this machine, some alcohol got into the storage area of his egg cell, or a zygote or something. And this resulted in him being short for an alpha plus. He was like 5'8" or something, 5'7". And because of this inferiority, he developed this complex over it. And from that inferiority complex, he started to question all the fundamental assumptions of the society he was in. And this led to him becoming this rebellious character in the world of Brave New World. And that, to me, struck me as interesting, because this is one of the areas where you diverge from normedom, where everything's just surface level, consuming and achieving pleasurable goals, to more introspective and metacognition about the society at large. Is if you just don't get if you are fundamentally inferior in some way, or you're incapable of fulfilling your basic goals. You know, and that's not necessarily intelligence related. It can be. I think probably there's a certain baseline of intelligence that you need to have to be able to think this way, obviously, right? But beyond that baseline, which is probably not as high as people think, maybe like 110, or even maybe even less than that in terms of IQ, at that point then, it just becomes like something that happens naturally if you're just incapable of achieving your goals. It's like a deep psychological reaction to being suffering due to being incapable of fulfilling your dreams, basically. You know, level of introspection has mostly just damaged me. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like that too. This is one of the reasons why my younger brother, who's even more subhuman than I am, he's like 5'5". I deliberately avoided talking about anything BP related to him. Like my thinking was, if he's gonna figure this out, he has to do it on his own, because BPing him about his situation and his desirability at the age that he's at, which was at the time, like he's 21 now, I believe. At the time, when I was first getting into this, obviously it was about 6 years ago. And, I mean, I was active on brain cells even back in 2017, so this is like, what? So I would have been like 24, 25 at the time. And my younger brother is about 12 years younger than me, so he was like 13. If I had just gone up to him and been like, I found out all this information that basically means that you are statistically guaranteed to be a subhuman, that will never achieve happiness in life because of this unalterable genetic biological trait that will make you repulsive to women as a rule forever. Like, this would have ruined his self-esteem. This would have ruined his ability to do anything in life. And or at this critical time of his life, it's actually better to not be blackpilled at that time. Like, if you're going to be BP'd, you should probably have it done after a certain point where you're not going to be demoralized into not making good high effort decisions that could potentially improve your circumstances. Yeah. I've met rich, smart people in engineering who'd never thought about the future, had no introspection, and believed everything the mainstream media said. They genuinely just cruised through life. Yeah, this is something else that occurred to me because I don't know if you guys, like, I'm not big into sports, but there's this one guy who became kind of a meme. I think it was in American football, and his name is Tim Tebow. And Tim Tebow is known for, like, whenever he would score a touchdown, I think, or something, he would do like this Hail Mary or whatever, where he does like the sign of the cross, and it became like a big joke because he's a super religious guy. And he's also a Chad, and he's a sports star. And I thought to myself, I can completely understand being religious in that circumstance. Like, if I was him, I would be looking at my life, and I would be thinking to myself, and by the way, another funny thing, just as an anecdote, is that he was also one of these sincere Christians who wanted to remain a virgin until marriage, which I believe he was. He did end up marrying, but it occurred to me that if I was in his shoes, I absolutely would be religious, because I would think, wow, look at all the blessings I've been given in my life. Look at what God has graced me with. I will absolutely be religious. But then when you look at these other circumstances, you really... Like, I couldn't imagine myself becoming religious. Like, I know guys that have gone through serious hardship and it marks a period of religiousness in their life, but that would never occur for me. Because to me, it would be more like this is evidence that this existence, there's no, like, I'm not somebody who necessarily is an atheist. Like, I could accept a philosophical argument for the existence of God, but there's no way I would believe that there's, like, a personal plan for everybody. If anything, I would say, like, if there is some kind of divine intellect, it's operating on a civilizational or even like a planetary basis. It's not going to be operating on the elements of individuals or on the lives of individuals. Yeah. There's this really funny video by Oreo Man from a while back where he's just sort of like, I hail Satan. I want to break bread with Satan. Because he sounds like a pretty good guy, because God ain't done shit for me. Or he said something along those lines. It was really funny. I've never been able to find it, though. Honestly, I don't think guys like us need to be thinking as much as we do. That's true. Unfortunately, thinking is kind of my coping mechanism. Like, one of the reasons I'm so widely read is because it's better than just rotting and being depressed. Because at least if my attention is focused on something outside of myself, I don't feel like despair over my circumstances. It's a way of avoiding that kind of despair, is just being able to focus on something completely unrelated to me, like take my mind and put it into another world somewhere, try to understand something and put pieces together on something else. Like, that's how I would cope. And I would argue that it's a little bit of a better cope than just rotting in Vidya and maybe even anime, though I'm not against that. Because at least you're sort of acquiring knowledge that might be useful at some point. Maybe. Very tangentially. But, yeah, it is 100% a coping mechanism. Feltree, it's honestly a privilege to be able to sincerely believe in a higher power that cares about you versus thinking there's only evolution and we're throwaway dead ends. Yes, I wish I could believe that. I think that, like, I could be convinced that there's a divine will throughout history in, like, a Hegelian sense. Like, and this is, a little overly philosophy grad stuff or whatever, but I could be convinced of that. But again, this would be something that would be operating on a national level. Like, I think you could make the argument, and actually, there was I remember that there was a papal bull, I believe, or doctrine that was promulgated in the 60s called Humanae Vitae. And Humanae Vitae reaffirmed the church's position on contraception, that contraception in the Catholic Church is considered a sin. And the arguments that the Pope made at the time were effectively that if you separate sexuality from procreation, you will inevitably result in what we see today, which is men and women losing their natural affinity and becoming more hostile towards each other, because a key element that bound men and women together, which is procreation, gets divided. Sexuality becomes more and more source of pleasure, unconnected from its consequences. And I could see that in a sense. Like, that would be an example of, say, like, reason in the philosophical sense manifesting in the punishment of civilizations that abandon it. I could see that. But as far as, like, God has a plan for everybody, I've never been able to be convinced of that. Even as a kid, like, my parents were kind of like vague deists in a way, I guess. Like, they were like, oh yeah, God exists, but, like, my mother's one of these spiritual but not religious types, if you know what I mean, where it's sort of like this vague feel-good stuff. But even then, it's never appealed to me. It's like it's never entered my life whenever something horrible would happen to me that I need to pray to God to see me through this or whatever. And it's not that I'm like super resilient or whatever. I just felt like it wouldn't accomplish anything. Like, there's no one listening. Oreo Man is 37. The fact he hasn't exited life is impressive. Yeah, and he's still making content as well. I think that's a big part of it. For a lot of us, this is therapeutic. Like, the way I deal with my problems, especially the ones that I cannot solve personally, is I try and intellectualize and understand them. Especially when, like, the big issue I have is when problems are presented to us as personal failings, which in some cases they are, okay? Like, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but oftentimes they'll take a systemic issue and they'll make it a matter of personal failing. And it's not just about relationships. They do this in the economy as well, which is another reason why I've done a lot of content on economics, because it's something that I feel very strongly about, is that, Zoomers in particular, younger millennials too, getting blamed for systemic economic problems on a personal level. That they're just too lazy, they're just not hardworking enough or whatever. But it also applies to dating as well. I was dissatisfied with the explanations that red pillars and even black pillars gave. Like, I found that the black pill before Incelmatics fell short of the reality. Because it was like, it would be 80-20 and looks are all that matter. Looks are all that matters. There's a lot of truth to that. But the 80-20 thing, it just didn't match what I had observed in reality. And that's why I came up with my demographic explanation. Lamprey Milk. Oh, you don't read your emails. Yeah, I forgot to check my emails. Yeah, I think you sent me one, right? Need to talk about Raymond's downfall. Didn't Raymond didn't he get flagged for, like, hate speech or some nonsense? See, this is the problem with, and I like Raymond because he was willing to platform guys like us who had no following just because he wanted to. But he was sort of making it into a revenue stream that he could support himself off of. And that requires an amount of content creation and channel growth that will inevitably cause you to hit a certain threshold of awareness where the authority is probably like when you hit 10K subs or something. I think even Western Decline got hit at like 2.5K or 2.6 or something, or 3 point something. Like, you reach a certain level of growth where it becomes inevitable that some kind of censor is going to come across your content, and it's only a matter of time before the trigger gets pulled, you know? And then you're screwed. Which is why, you know, like, I have plans to make videos and stuff, but as I've gotten this wagey job, even though it's not fun, you know, it's a source of income, and I know that this could be taken away at any time. You know, as soon as you reach a certain threshold, it could be taken away at any time, and then you're fucked. But it's a shame because he was quite tame in terms of his positions on things. And I remember that when Thomas White interviewed him, and I was on the panel with Thomas White and a few other people, there were people that were dropping things while Raymond was streaming. They were saying things that I know could get him banned, and I was saying, like, you gotta stop talking like this. You know, yeah, like, they don't like Raymond because he's not sufficiently based and white nationalist, I guess. But it's because he's like a 20,000 plus sub account. You can't say this sort of shit, regardless of how you personally feel about it. You know? And I mean, he is genuinely bald cell, you know, facially, he's very average in the face. Like, he's not LARPing, right? And that generation, actually, because he's a little bit older than me, I saw the tail end of it. But that generation, you still had normie tier guys, and even some below average guys, that were able to get into relationships and dating because the social scene had not transitioned completely to online. It was still, because I even remember when I was a young teen, when I was like 13, 14, we didn't have social media to the extent that we do now, and for the most part, guys and girls had to go outside still to find things to do, you know, to keep themselves entertained, particularly during the summer. And it was quite common for there to be like a group of kids that were mixed sex, boys and girls, and that inevitably, just through that and through interaction and becoming familiar with each other, you'd have guys that would get past the looks filter because they would build propinquity, as they say. That's a word that, if you guys remember, First really loved to talk about. And it was extremely important. It was a very good point. Propinquity is very important. That's the attraction that develops once familiarity is established between a man and a woman. A woman will find a man more attractive as he becomes more familiar to her, which is kind of, it's interesting because it's sort of the friend pill, I guess, right? And it runs completely counter to dating apps and stuff, because dating apps are all front-loaded. It's the exact opposite. You know, which is largely why women will swipe left on guys that in like 10 years prior, 20 years prior, they would have been perfectly, like, they probably wouldn't have been initially attracted to him, but they would have developed an attraction to him over time by interacting with him and becoming familiar with him. My supervisor is a 1% Warrior Skull Chad type of guy who's like a 7 or 8 kids by 5 different women. Wouldn't throw themselves at the guy, but overall I believe it's demographic issues. That does happen, but you have to consider that's like a 1% Chad, right? So yeah, a 1% Chad will take up more than his fair share of women. But like what percentage of guys actually fall into that category versus women? So even if a 1%er man takes 5 times as many women, that's 5% of the women out of the pool, technically speaking. In practice, the actual impact of that is relatively minor, and the data shows this, right? Like, the data shows, if you guys remember, maybe I'll pull it up, because I've used this chart several times, right? Is that you actually see celibacy going up for women as well as men as time goes on, but obviously it's going up much faster for men, but it is going up for women, and I think it's something like if you combine 3 months or longer dry spells, right up until lifelong celibacy, you get something like, here it is. There we go. Let me just make sure that this looks good. Hang on. There. See if I can shrink that a little bit. There we go. So you can see that the rates of celibacy are going up for women as well as men, but men are going up much higher. And to me, this is why I think that it's more demographic than it is like women are just choosing to be with a small group of highly promiscuous men. Though I do think that is a factor that does exist. It's just a statement of fact, especially for one night stands. It's mainly socioeconomic issues. It's his looks. Well, Raymond, I think doesn't he have some properties that he's renting or something, or he's renting out? Like money wise, he's not doing bad. That's my understanding. Yeah, so I don't think it's money that's involved. Raymond could easily get black/curry poontang. White man can't be inkwell. Raymond standards are white Becky only. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. You also have to remember his age, though, right? Because he's in his late 30s now, right? So what are his options actually going to be in America? Though, from what I recall, the times that geomaxing has been brought up to him, he's shot it down pretty fast. He doesn't seem to be interested. So, in that sense, you could say, well, there's a solution for you, but you're not going to take it. Which, fair play. If I could make somehow $2,000 a month, like $2,000 US a month, remotely or whatever, I would be out of here tomorrow. I would be booking my flight. I was just looking into visas for Brazil, and I could get into Brazil. We have a 90-day visitor visa that can be extended to 180 days. So effectively, there are ways that you could stay year-round in Brazil through other shenanigans. And I'm thinking, if I had the money to just live there, fuck yes, I would. I just have to learn Portuguese. Blue Skies Media used to rant about a friend who had a minimum wage job, lived with his mom, and had several baby mamas. That does exist. If you got the looks for it, you can pull this off. Yeah, bro wants to go to Brazil. Yeah, hey, listen, look, I know Brazil is all fucked up. I do know. Listen, I actually have some pretty funny memes that I could post from Brazil. Hang on. Here's the joys of Brazil.
Pai nosso que está no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino. Seja feita a vossa vontade. Assim na terra como no céu. E pão nosso cada dia nos dai hoje.
Okay, just in case that gets hit for being too graphic, is some crazy guy, but I know that Brazil is all fucked up. I know. But I'm willing to try it out. And more so, I was thinking I would start by checking out Rio and seeing how it is, right? It could be a disaster, and I'm already prepared for even if I get mugged or whatever. I know what you're supposed to do, where don't look at the guy. Keep about $150 in your pocket, along with your wallet. Bring a burner phone, and a cheap burner phone. Let him steal the $150 in burner phone, and just let him go. And that's the trick you got to do. Yo, my live chat is on. Saint, I would honestly pay for high IQ new vids. Never seen an individual surpasses these concepts very well. Well, thank you. I'll tell you what. if you want to request anything in particular, I'm down for that. Like, I would definitely like. Okay, so one of the benefits. Here's the thing. One of the upsides to getting this job now is that I have enough money that I can restart my subscription to, or my prescription, I should say, to my ADHD medication, which I know that a lot of people like will abuse stuff like Adderall or whatever for getting high or whatever. In my case, I am genuinely, you can choose not to believe this or not, but I am genuinely one of those people that critically needs it. Like, I have really bad cognitive sluggishness problems. I'm sure you guys have noticed that oftentimes when I'm talking, I'll have to stop myself and halt and maybe repeat myself. And the reason for that is because it's easy for me to meander off and to get lost in what I was thinking or trying to say, because I just have severe cognitive sluggishness problems. And just go to Eastern European shithole. Yeah, but honestly, look, don't take this the wrong way if you're European. I'm not a fan of European culture, generally. Like, I find it's very cold and standoffish. And the same goes for Asia. It's just too different. Asian countries are very, like, they'll be polite. And, you know, your white card can go far in these countries, but it's very trad in a lot of ways. And this is something that we talked about in my C-Maxing video, because I interviewed Aibo, who has been a veteran geomaxer and who's gone all throughout Southeast Asia. And he'll talk about Thailand is actually a lot more conservative than people think. Thailand has a lot of escort maxing. They have a red light culture, but it's separate from the mainstream Thai culture. Mainstream Thai culture is actually fairly conservative. It's not as conservative as China or as Vietnam, but it is way more conservative than the Philippines. And also, just to be quite honest with you, I'm not a big fan of Asian women generally in terms of looks. Like, I don't mind them. Look, I'm not picky, okay? Just to be clear, I'm not picky. If I was given the option of, like, a nice rice waifu who actually likes me, I would be interested in going for that. But if I do have an option, I would prefer, like, if I had to pick between, like, a Matina from some kind of Latin American country or a sea monkey from Thailand or Philippines, I'm going to go with a Matina. Canadian government should fund your streams. Yeah. I'm trying to advise white men to escape Canada and just go somewhere else and make room for all the Jeets coming in. If you say you're from Canada, they will think you're rich, which leads to the women to want to get that passport. That's true. That's true. And JB White is way stronger in Asian countries compared to Latin America. Yeah. I imagine that it depends. I'd have to see for myself, but I'm not really, like, I know that JBW has probably the strongest pull in, like, Philippines and Thailand, but they're just so different from us. In terms of their social norms and expectations, and it's very materialistic cultures generally. Which, you know, I guess all cultures are materialistic in some extent, but, like, the way that marriage and relationships are structured in these countries, it's very formal and very, like, you have like, if you want to marry a Thai woman who's not, like, from the countryside working in a factory that has, like, more than a high school education or basic high school education, like, that is in some way intelligent or whatever, you are going to be following, like, you're going to have to follow along traditional lines when it comes to, you have to appease her family, you have to do this and that. Latin America, the nice thing about Latin America, and again, this comes down to personal preference, is their dating and relationship culture is, if anything, looser than ours is. And they're not, like, you're never going to find a trad wife in Latin America. But that's not really what I'm looking for anyways. I'd be quite content. And I remember saying this in my Discord server. I think a good end to my life would be like if I get involved with some hot crazy chick with a bunch of anime tattoos or whatever, and is like a fantastic lay, and then I get stabbed to death by her drug dealer ex-boyfriend at some point in the future. I think that would be an okay way to go. At least I could say I lived my life, I got to enjoy it. Hey, are you getting close to your mic? You've been getting louder. No, I'm not any closer than I am now. This mic does have a volume control, actually. So this is louder, this is quieter, and this is about where it was at. And yeah, the rice cells are making excellent mics. So I don't know, man. I was in Thailand and had zero JBW at all, and neither did my better-looking younger brother. I have heard this stuff. That it's not what it used to be. Now, if you look at the statistics when it comes to geomaxing in places like Thailand, the number of whites there is like 0.1%. It's very small. Even if you factor in the passport bros that have been going there. And a lot of them are also boomers that really are not going to be competing for the same ecosystem of women as effectively. Because, like, it's not like Asian women are just attracted to financial success. Like, they want young, attractive men just like any other woman does. Relatively young and attractive. So you still are probably in a decent position, but another issue with Thailand is that, and Asia generally, is that they're aging quite rapidly. Thailand has a fertility rate, I think it was like the second lowest fertility rate in the world. It was like 0.7 babies per woman. That country is going to it's actually already rapidly aging. I'm pretty sure the average age in Thailand is something like 38, 39. It's quite bad. Mercer's Soup from Thomas White. Hey, Thomas, how you doing? It's good to see you're still going. Should hop on one of your streams at some point. My main issue is that, okay, my face is not fucked up. Like, I have an okay face. My issue, I think, primarily is with my height, and my hairline also. But that's something I could work on. Like, my height is, I would say, more of a bottleneck, because I'm like 5'7.5". So if I go to a shorter country, that should actually improve things. And apparently Thailand is getting taller. Thailand, I believe the average height for 18 to 25-year-olds is like 5'10" or something, or 5'9". They're actually getting significantly taller. So that could also have an effect. It's sort of like how South Korea used to be a geomax location, and now nobody, like, you get warned away from South Korea because of how high the standards are for women there. And their average height is like 5'10" now, or 5'9.5" or something. So, like, the main thing I'm thinking of with Brazil is that it's such a huge country, and there's really very few countries that are quite like this. It's such a huge country that there's vast sections of the country that are completely devoid of foreigners. A country like Thailand, it's not a small country, but it's a lot smaller than Brazil. And it's much more popular tourist destination. Like, from what I've been seeing, because I've done a little research into Brazil, outside of Rio, because Rio is the tourist trap city, and that's the city where you're gonna get the least bang for your buck, as like a white Westerner. But if you go outside of Rio, whether it's in the south of the country, which is allegedly where the whiter people are, or you go further north. And I know that our Brazilian in the chat here, Bilal Futurista, was warning against that. Which there's actually very good reasons to avoid that. But the frequency of foreigners and also of whites in general, as you go further north in Brazil, drops off quite dramatically. And in the south is also fairly rural, is my understanding, the panhandle of Brazil, because it's mostly farmers. But I doubt I would stick out much there. But yeah. As of right now, I mean, look, I've done the math on this, and once I get my finances in order, if I can keep this job, which I don't see why I wouldn't, I could save like 1,500 leaf bucks per month, and then because of the nature of the job, you get laid off for about 4 months in the winter season, and then you can collect unemployment, and then you get hired back on after the winter season. That could be my time to head down south and check it out. And I would have enough savings, and then also I could draw from the unemployment that I could have a fairly comfortable couple months down there. So, the only easy Geomax locations left are in Africa. Well, actually, Africa, here's something that's kind of paradoxical about Africa. Oh, Bilal Futurista, you can join without money. I've actually scrapped that, which I haven't updated it yet, but I'm not doing the money thing anymore, because to be quite honest with you, I mean, one of the reasons is because I didn't know where my money was coming from to survive every month. But now that that's not an issue, I'm just going to be removing that requirement, and it's going to be based on like my familiarity with you. And I know that you and most of the other guys in the live chat now have been around for a long time. Like, you've been consistently on here. So if you want to just join the Discord and send me a ping, I'll just let you straight in. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, Holy Rob, don't worry about it. I could let you in too, because I've seen you consistently as well. So, primarily my main concern is I'm trying to avoid letting in people that are unfamiliar, that could potentially have bad intentions, because you know how easy it is to get Discord servers nuked, you know? And I really don't want to be a nanny when it comes to moderating people and, you know, warning people that, oh, you can't make jokes like that. That's not permitted by Discord TOS. But, yeah. What are you sending me? What's this? High school beauty queen 16 slams trolls after marrying 65-year-old mayor. Where the hell was this? Quain Rode de Camargo? What the fuck are you sending me? I don't know, like, why is this... Okay, explain this one to me. Anton. Why is this interesting? This is just a woman marrying some rich old guy. There's plenty of that. And the real troubled mind, the reason is that there's a lot of people that are neat maxed, or they're with their parents, or some combination of both. They have plenty of time. So. Oh, and another thing actually that I did want to talk about was, what are we looking below? Dude is from Brazil. Dude is a small mayor in a small town, so he's basically the king of said town. He demanded this teenage pussy, and his servants threw him the best they got at him in exchange for money and position. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. I'm not surprised about that. This dude has a big-ass nose. Damn, she's fine. God, you know, but what's annoying about this, actually, you know what this reminds me of? This is something that you see with like the race pill when it comes to looks. Okay, one of the reasons why whites are generally perceived as more attractive than other races is because we did not have polygamy for most of our existence, and there was a relatively free degree of mate choice. And this would result in the inability for these wealthy old men to monopolize access to young, attractive women and basically nullify their genes. Because this woman's attractive, this guy looks like a goblin. His genetics are going to ruin like whatever her genetic qualities are. So, like those features that are attractive, they're just going to get wiped out. They're going to get blended out. And I think this would happen in a lot of cases where like the prettiest woman would end up getting monopolized by this old, ugly, rich dude somewhere in like Middle East or in China or in South Asia. And the consequence would be that it just uglifies the whole population over a long enough timeline. But yeah, I'm not surprised. Like that actually is what people when you see women talk about how, like, you'll see red pill women talk about how marriage is or polygamy is actually based because it allows the alpha males to be selected for. The reality is that the alpha males are not selected for, because what actually happens is that you just end up with a gerontocracy where the oldest men are able to monopolize sexual access to young women because they've had more time to accumulate resources. And that's if you look at any polygamous society, it's never the most attractive, desirable men that have all the women. It's the men that have the most inherited status, the most inherited wealth. And it typically is like the oldest men that will just end up getting access to these women. Wait, what's this? But if he ever gets a word that she cheated on him, he will torture and murder her, and she knows this and will still do it. Yep. That's not surprising. Oh, hey, Gresh, how you doing? And actually, one thing that I wanted to talk about, I was really butthurt, genuinely upset about this when it happened. I'm not so bothered now because I got a new job, but for a brief period of time, I was working at a place, and it was some of my coworkers. One of my coworkers was this brown woman, and the first time I met her, I sat down with her, and I've gone through this a million times with different people, but now I'll get it on the record, so that nobody can ask me questions again. I can just point to the stream. So I sat down next to this woman, who's like a 20-something-year-old. She looked like she looked some kind of South Asian, but she didn't have like facially South Asian features. So I think she was some kind of mix. And she first started by talking about how she was taking welding, and that she knows that she has a guaranteed job in welding because she's a woman, and that's why she's taking it. And she says, you wouldn't have a job in welding because you're a white man, but I would have a job. And I just said, yeah, you're right. I wasn't even offended by that because it's just a statement of fact. Though I will say, just as a side note, something that is interesting that I've started noticing as I've talked to, as I've tried to get grants to take training or to go back to school and complete my degree. When I've talked to the the bursary and scholarship people, and they were always women, by the way, I consistently am getting just told straight up, yeah, you're a white man, so you shouldn't even bother applying for this. You're not going to get it. But it was in a matter-of-factly way. This is just the way it is. And this is significant because in the past, the way that they would phrase these kind of things is by... Okay, I got to get this guy's face off my... Sorry, he's just such a goblin. The way that they would phrase this in the past is that they would just say that, they wouldn't just tell you this. They wouldn't just say you shouldn't even bother applying to this program because you're not going to get in because of your race. They would just be evasive about it because the ideology behind it is you are a privileged white man And this is countering the innate privilege that you have by giving these women and these minorities an equal chance by leveling the playing field. This is why these things exist. And that was originally how it was conceived. So the way that these people should be thinking about it is that we'll put in your application. We know that because you're a straight white man, you will automatically be put on top of the list just because of systemic racism. And we also know that because of our diversity quotas, this will level the playing field. So you should have an equal shot as the brown women and whatever. Like that's how they should be thinking. But now they're just straight up saying, no, I mean, if you try and apply, you're not going to get in. You're a white man. You're not going to get in. Don't even bother. Because of the diversity requirements. She explicitly said that to me. And you'll also get these brown voids actually bragging about it. Being like, yeah, I know I'm guaranteed a job. You won't have one. I'm guaranteed a job, though. But anyways, that's sort of a side thing. It's just notable that they recognize now that it's basically like a caste system. And it's literal systemic racism against white men in hiring and education. Literal systemic racism, and they acknowledge it as a matter of fact now, which I think is significant. Anyways, so I just said, yeah, you're probably right, and we moved on to something else, and we started talking about the trades, because obviously welding is a trade, and I said, trades are kind of hard on the body, so over the course of a career it could be difficult for your health. And she said, oh, but I feel fine. And I said, yeah, but this, like the health, like the physical consequences of trades where you start to have joint issues and whatever, or maybe an injury, like those accumulate over the course of a career, like 20, even 30 years. And then I said, there's also men and women have different body compositions. So something could affect you more than could affect a man. And it may not be obvious now because there's not a lot of women in these fields. She immediately got up, went to the manager and told the manager something. The manager then took me, I think it was like an hour and a half later, and immediately fired me on the spot and said, you know what you said. You know what you said. And I asked him, what did I say? What did I say? He said, you know what you said. Instantly lost the job like that. So whatever this woman said, they didn't even bother investigating. They didn't even bother seeing what was going on. And I know for a fact this guy's thought process, because this was the guy that hired me, by the way, and he had no problem with it. The thought process that he had was, we only hired this guy 10 days ago. This brown woman is complaining or saying something outlandish that he said to her, even though we've got no other complaints from any other employees that have interacted with him. We know that she could potentially fuck up all of our situations and make life a lot harder for us. So we're just gonna fire this guy on the spot just because it's easier. And by the way, my manager was a white man. He was a white man. And at that point then I just realized that it's kind of like the way that India was occupied by the British. It's not like the British had millions of men patrolling every street in India. The way that it worked is that they had like a token force that maintained certain cities, like especially coastal cities where there was a lot of trade. But then the rest of India was internally managed, and the East India Company employees of local origin that policed the colony, they were known as sepoys. And when, on the rare occasion there would be a rebellion in India, the British would find that within a day, they had completely lost control of the entire country, all of India, except for these coastal cities where they had actual British garrisons. And that's how fragile the control of the British over India was. But because these sepoys would enforce their own rule. Sound? Is there... Okay. Just making sure. Because the sepoys would enforce the British rule on other Indians just because it was more convenient for them than trying to establish an independent state, the British were able to rule India for 200 years, I believe, or 250 years. As long as you have a population that is completely self-centered and only concerned about what benefits them personally, you don't need to have like a massive police state controlling everything. You can just rely on disincentives from above, and everybody will just self-reinforce. They will just enforce these norms themselves. And that is exactly what's happening here. And what I realized is that it's not so much that we're not being controlled by a bunch of Jews in a room somewhere, and they're issuing orders to all these people that just follow them unquestioningly. You just realize that whites in particular, like white men in particular, are extremely selfish and self-centered as a group, and are only concerned with what benefits themselves and what advances their own personal interests. They don't the average white man would not piss on another white man if he was on fire. Like, that's the degree of lack of concern that they have for each other. Whereas in these other communities, you don't see anywhere near that degree of selfishness. And that is why I think our countries are just being taken from us, because it's more convenient for this manager to fire me and potentially jeopardize my living situation than it is to simply follow protocol and figure out who did what and determine if there was any truth to what was being said. And that's actually when I formally, because I've always had this sort of lingering thought of like, I want things to get better, because my family's been in Canada for 350 years. We were one of the founding settler families in Canada. So this country is belongs to me as much as could possibly be in terms of seniority, I suppose you could say. But then, so I had like this lingering sense of like I wanted to have the country saved. But then I realized this is the composition of our people. These are who we are. Okay, our country, based on this, is already lost, because there are other groups of people who may have their own flaws. Like, for example, Indians, they're known for exploiting each other, especially economically. But they have this in-group preference that is really strong, baked in, and they will operate as a group against out-groups, even if they themselves internally are exploitative towards each other. We can't do that. So inevitably, and it's sort of like, and this actually ties over to the grooming gang stuff in the UK, because now that's flaring up again. And I remember reading about this one particular situation with the grooming gangs where this father wanted to get his daughter out of one of these Pakistani-controlled crack houses, basically. And so he tried to go in there and get her, and he ended up getting trespassed and arrested and thrown in jail because the daughter refused to go with him. She wanted to stay with these guys. And so he got trespassed, and he got removed from the premises by police. Okay, well, at that point then, what loyalty should an English man have to these girls? Like, you could say, the only defense that I've seen is that, oh, they're underage, which, okay, I guess, that's true. But, I mean, that aside, like, as an English man who the only thing you get out of doing, for example, what they did in Ulster, is that you'll have the police state crack down on you and arrest you and ruin your life. I could understand doing it for a group of women that were genuinely loyal to your people. Like, for example, the Pakistanis and Sikhs, to a large extent, they're very ethnocentric, and their communities are very closed. Their women, I would say, often due to fear of consequences, of reprisals, are not going to defect from their men. In that circumstance, it makes perfect sense to be as protective of your women as you want to be, or as would be required. In the case of the English, there's no way to ensure loyalty to the group. Like, in fact, women are incentivized for defecting from the group. Well, why would you sacrifice anything for a group that there's no way of preventing defection from? It's like whenever you see these Like, and this is one of the reasons I've sort of slowed down on my Twitter use, is that I'll see these right-wing accounts. They'll find like some white woman that got killed by a black guy, and they'll make a big scene about it, and they'll post all over, oh, look at this horrible attack on our people. Look at our wonderful white women are being horribly oppressed by these black vicious animals or whatever. And then when you actually peer behind the curtain, you realize, oh, she's in a relationship with this guy. Or she like was hooking up with this guy, and then she decided to end that hookup. And that was what... I'm like, why are we going to bat for these women? Like, what... Like, okay, I guess you could say, and what they'll do is they'll try and defend this when this inevitably gets exposed, because it always does. Like, these murders, it's not like, it does happen where you'll have black criminals that will just, like what happened to that Ukrainian girl on the bus. That does happen. But overwhelmingly, what happens is that it's some kind of relationship-based conflict, relationship-based dispute. And at that point then, okay, she's already decided she's not on our team anyways. Why is this our responsibility? Why should we be concerned about this? And it just becomes really tiresome, because like you'll see these stories and then you just look into it and peel it behind the curtain every single time. That's what you see. And I'm not even like one of these people that gets vicious about it, where it's like, oh, it's good, Toll Page, she's dead, whatever. I'm just like, why? How does this have anything to do with me? This is like, if she chose that this is the group that she wants to be a part of, and this occurs to her within that community, how does this, like, that's her side, It'd be kind of like an Asian woman who has exclusively dates white men, and then she ends up getting murdered by a white man, or actually more likely, she'll like discover one day that this man is like a secret transvestite and has been for 15 years, and now he's ready to become a woman and transitions or whatever. Do you think Asian men are going to go up and be like, oh, look at this horrible thing that has happened to our brave Asian women? This is an atrocity. It's like, no, they divest from that group of women because they're not part of it. But, yeah, it's one thing that kind of annoys me. And I understand the political utility. Like, I understand guys that are remigrationists that want to get these people out of their country, and they see this as a means of achieving that. Like, bringing attention to this, and maybe they hope that women will realize that their interests are at stake if they continue to side with this group of foreign men. But my position would be, you could just look at the evidence and you don't see anything about that. Like, maybe the only group that I would see where you could maybe say that that's happening is in France. French women generally vote right-wing relative to women from other parts of Europe, and also to some extent increasingly Germany. You're starting to see it. But other than France and Germany, and France, France is a demographic black hole. We don't even know what's going on there because they obfuscate the numbers so much, right? But other than that, all these other countries, the women overwhelmingly vote for this. As a matter of fact, the recent Swiss referendum that happened on capping the population at 10 million, it just missed it by 5%. It was 45 versus 10%. 45 versus 55. Guess which side women overwhelmingly voted for? Guess which side? It was not to cap the population. Women overwhelmingly voted, or to a substantial, disproportionate degree, voted for keeping the population, basically keeping the borders open. That's just how they are, right? And Anton says, just a reminder that white dudes that hate ethnics more, because if they hated white women, they'd be lynched by the entire community. Yeah, that's true. They're in a really tight pickle because white nationalism is already a relative, I wouldn't say it's a minority, maybe. Well, you could say maybe at a stretch like 30% if you were to probe for like unconscious white nationalist preferences, you might get like 30, at most 35% of young white men might have some degree of unconscious preference for a white nationalist political position, even if they're not conscious of it. So they'll never win demographically, especially in countries like America. So they really are hoping that white women will make up the difference, and they'll appeal to, well, look at how much more dangerous your lives are. But they don't seem to realize, and they'll do things like, oh, they're just brainwashed. It's suicidal empathy. Whatever. My position to that would be, or my opposition to that would be, that's not what you see at all. Because if it was suicidal empathy in general, you would see them appealing to the most vulnerable group in question. But they'll cover up ethnics abusing their own women, like child marriages, forced marriages in certain communities. Like, you never see feminists talk about this. So I don't even think it's that. I think what it comes down to is that these women see their own men, like English women see English men as the biggest single threat. And their political thinking is structured around weakening and demoralizing their own men to the greatest extent possible. And women that suffer from other coalition members, which would in this case be immigrant men, because immigrant men are in a coalition with these white women, politically speaking. If they attack some women and harm them, this is seen as collateral damage, but it's like acceptable collateral damage. It's acceptable damage. That's how I think a lot of them, at least on a subconscious level, that's what they think. They think, yes, okay, these men are more dangerous individually, but politically, white men are far more dangerous. And it's more important to weaken white men as much as possible than it is to protect our women. You know, and that recent case of the Irish women, like locking hands around this migrant that stabbed a bunch of children in Ireland to prevent Irish men from doing mob justice on them, is a perfect example of that. Because and their fear is that if their men get more kinetic in their politics, this is going to make the situation that much worse for women, because that means that they'll have political energy that they don't have now, like kinetic political energy, like what happened in Belfast with burning all that shit down. Compare that to America, where whites do nothing but complain on the internet. Right? Whites are basically a politically dead group in America. They have no political energy. And white women are very satisfied with that. Like they much prefer white men just be sullen and complain on the internet about women. That's how it works. And there was something I wanted to read up here with Nero. I read about a case where the daughter broke her father's fingers so she could go to the Packy Shag house. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And every time that I've seen these things, and I've also seen women in public, pushing this stuff, or very clearly being of that political persuasion, I think to myself, well, this is what they want. This is what they want. Okay? Like, why? Like, what are you going? We cannot physically prevent them from pursuing what they want, which is these men, and access. Not necessarily these men individually, but they want access to these foreign men, and they also want them as political allies. Most importantly, to suppress the local men and prevent local men from organizing. Because if a nationalist government comes to power, the first thing that they're going to prioritize is fighting age men of their nationality. Okay? They're going to start pushing economic and political things that benefit their own men. And this would be at the expense of women, particularly economically, and in education. They don't want this. They want what they're voting for. I do not believe this weird thing where they seem to assume that women have no political agency, or that they're just retarded, or they're just like children in adult bodies. I actually disagree with that strongly. I think they're acting very rationally in pursuing what they want. It'd be against the interests of Swiss women to cap the population. More immigrant men means their value goes up. That is a big factor, for sure. But primarily, I think it's about opposing the political will of men. Like, maybe at some point I'll do a deep dive into Lol Cow Cafe, or no, I'm thinking of Crystal Cafe. Crystal Cafe is full of troons, so. But Lol Cow Farm, that's like a female version of 4chan, and they have plenty of these politics threads, and you can get a very good holistic impression of what these women think just purely by looking at how they talk about the situation. And what they will say is, like, they'll complain about immigrant attacks. They will. But they will say, at the same time, they always qualify things with, but we can't vote for the Nationalist Party because look at how much they hate women. Look at how misogynistic they are. Look at it's filled with these incel white men that want to take away our rights. So we can't vote for them. It's better to vote for the left, even though they allow the immigrants to attack. Like, this is what they talk about. If white nationalists took over, streets would become safer for women. Yeah, they become safer for women, but the problem is that the power of men, political, social, and economic power for their own men, will increase relative to them, because a nationalist government would, maybe it's possible that a nationalist government would just be like a feminist government anyways. But for the most part, because their political support base are young white men in these countries, they're going to prioritize the interests of young white men, politically, economically, socially. And this would go against the interests of the young white women because they will become politically weaker. They might have to lower their standards for a relationship because they lose access to Gibbs Me Dat jobs, DEI jobs, that are specifically marked out for them so that they can live a comfortable middle-class existence without a man. They might have to start, and they don't want to do that. Yes, it's worth the risk of having dangerous streets to maintain the position that they have now. Letting in foreigners over time will remove feminist powers. That's true, but this is sort of similar to, if you look at how Canadians vote. I live in Switzerland. 55% of females voted no and 54% of men. Oh yeah, let's see. Hold on, let's see. Just 1 second. Because I have this bookmarked. It's good to see that Tails watches my streams. Here we are. Here. I'm just going to translate this for everybody. Just 1 second here. Hang on. There we go. It's particularly among women that the rejection of the text has also increased significantly. Also gained ground in the center right. There you go. This is in the newspaper. Excuse me. No, Tails, I mean, you can believe what you want, but I'm telling you right now that your strategy of trying to appeal to women is going to lose. Because women, yes, eventually, and the point I was trying to make before we interrupted this was the way that women think is similar to the way that boomers think. Like in Canada, if you look at the voting record breakdown, in the last election, every single age group voted for the Conservatives over the Liberals, purely on immigration concerns, except for boomers, like 65 plus. They voted majority Liberal, and they carried the election and won it. This is because boomers, even though this will inevitably result, because they're thinking, we need these people to work these shit jobs for low pay so that our quality of life can be higher due to things being cheaper for us. But they're not realizing in the long run, like once they're pensioners, and once they're retired and collecting pension in 10 years' time, these people are going to become the voting majority, and they're going to pull all of those retirement benefits because they're only going to whites. Like they don't want money extracted from their taxes to pay for old white people. Because like Indians and Africans and whatever, they're concerned about their own people. They're not concerned about white people, old white people in particular. So this is a suicidal policy in the long run, even for the boomers while they're still alive. Eventually their retirements are going to get yanked. But what matters is the short term. It's also another example of this is the industrialization of China. There was America's economy, because it's already a mature economy. There's no real growth sectors left because everything's already been developed. Per capita growth rates were very slow. They were like a couple percentages a year, or maybe like 1-2% a year. Well, the capitalist class demanded access to China because the Chinese were growing rapidly, like 5% year over year, compounding, and they wanted to get in on the ground level to profit from that investment. So the outsourcing in the 80s and 90s began with all these manufacturers and all this investment pouring into China to get in on the ground level, and then within 30 years you end up with an enormous increase in your investment. But the consequence of this has been they basically created a rival superpower that now can put a check on America. It was a completely disastrous decision in the long term, but they're only concerned about short term. And it's the same when it comes to women. Women aren't strategizing in the long term. They're thinking about what benefits or harms them personally in the short term. It does not benefit women to have a nationalist party in power that could potentially benefit young men at the expense of young women. And because political power is a zero-sum game, you cannot create a system that gives men a leg up compared to where they are now that would not relatively diminish the status of women compared to men. They're not going to accept that. Right? So it's a suicidal policy in the long run, but they're going to do it anyways. You know, it's kind of like, and another thing is, you know, I've had conversations with boomers where I explain to them just bluntly, like, you realize with the immigration policy we have now, whites are going to be a minority in Canada in 20 years' time. Yeah, and that's probably, that schedule is probably greatly advanced since then because of all how high immigration has become since when I would have these conversations. And the boomers would just, and this was 2 separate occasions, completely different boomers, unrelated to each other, different cities even. And they just looked me dead in the eyes and said, but I'm going to be dead then. Like, what? And the implication was like, why do you think this should matter to me? Like, why are you, what does this even have to do with me? I'm not going to be around. Why are you implying that I should care about this? No, that's, and these behaviors, these decisions, they have long-term consequences. Yeah, they always respond with, I'll be dead by then, not my problem. And you know what? My answer to that is, I agree, and I'm going to have the same policy. My concern is, how can I get to a place that I am personally happy, and I feel like I'm fulfilling at least my greatly downwardly adjusted life goals, where I'm at least getting some kind of joy and satisfaction out of life. How do I achieve that? Okay. It's not going to happen in Canada. It's basically baked in the pie. It's baked in the pie politically and also individually for myself. Even if I hit the lottery tomorrow, I've aged out because of how age gap relationships are so ostracized and stigmatized now. And age gap is in like, I remember overhearing a girl talking to, she's like 25 and her boyfriend was 32, and she was like, or no, 31. He was 31 and she was 25, and she was saying, "Oh, but I don't know, the age gap is so strange. It's so strange." And these were whites. 6-year age gap for Zoomers is considered weird. Like and we're not talking 6-year age gap from like an 18-year-old with a 24-year-old or whatever. We're talking 25 with a 31-year-old. By that age, by 25, you're a fully grown adult. You have a minimum required experience in adult life, that you're no longer like a naive kid that could be exploited or whatever. And even then, they consider it weird. So in my case, I would have access to maybe late 20s women. Maybe. And that's assuming everything else is in line as well. So it's baked in the pie. Like if I stay here, even if I hit the lottery tomorrow or I suddenly started making great money, my options are still greatly attenuated. So I'm like, well, my best strategy should be figure out how to extract, even if it's extracting. Like if I could get a remote job and then just spoof my location, like I'll set up my laptop at my mother's place or something and just have it running, and then I can just remote into it. And then, because I know one guy who's doing this in the Philippines. He's living in the Philippines. He's working customer support or something. And his residency location is Quebec. And he has he's using, I think, his parents' address as his address, and he has a computer set up that he remotes into to make it appear that he's doing his job from there. But in reality, he's doing it from the Philippines. And that's a great setup. And apparently he married an attractive woman too. Like she was actually quite pretty by our standards. And he has a daughter, I believe, and that's good for him. It's good for him. I'm glad that he got that figured out. But I'm like, yeah, we should all be thinking the same thing. How do we set ourselves up so we can just parasitically extract from our home countries to live our lives with a higher quality of life somewhere else? Even though it's kind of like remittances. It's like draining resources out of the local economy and into foreign countries. But fuck them. This country hates me anyways. Why should I care? Could never go to Brazil, too high in Hib and frail. I'm afraid I would get kidnapped and murdered. That might happen. That's true. But, I tell you what, maybe I can hang out with Bilao Futurista. We'll chill out and we'll be Brazilian incels. And he can show me how to avoid getting kidnapped. Show some respect for the boomers. They put food on your plate. Yeah, well, most of them are extracting food from us now. Because I think the median boomer is like 65 or something. Like they're on average retired now. Actual baby boomers. Like a lot of people, they'll just use the term boomer for middle-aged or older people, and that would include a lot of Gen X now. So, but actual boomers, I believe the cutoff is like 1964, which I think is like 58 or 59. That's like the cutoff for the youngest boomers. So most boomers are actually approaching retirement age or older. Mercer is a robbing victim fetish. Yes, that actually is one of my life goals, is to become a robbery victim. That's the plan. And then I'll be walking with a GF, and I'll dive to shield her from the robber, just to have a so that I can go out respecting women, you know? They'll remember me as a woman respecter. Gen Xers are evil. You know, Gen X, I will say, having worked for them, I prefer Gen Xers as bosses over boomers, because what I have noticed with Gen Xers is, at a minimum, they do not, at least in my experience, they don't force you to do bullshit to make yourself appear busy at all times. Like, if there's nothing to do, they'll just let you relax, in my experience. Whereas with boomers, I remember when I was a teenager, I was a little, just after high school, I worked at Walmart as an overnight stalker at Walmart. And my manager at the time was a boomer. And he had this thing where they would refuse to allow you to not only sit down, but even get on one knee or something. You had to have both feet on the ground, standing at all times. If you had to put stuff in a shelf at the bottom, you would have to squat. And if he caught you like kneeling or sitting down, they would get he would get super angry about it. And he ended up cutting me down to like 2 shifts a week or something. And then I just eventually quit because he just made it miserable. And it's interesting because he was the manager, and then there was a supervisor below him who was a older millennial. Or was he an older? Yeah, he would have been an older millennial because he was like 6 or 7 years older than me. So he would have been like the older millennial group. And he was a lot more chill about it. Like if he was the one that was managing at the time and the manager was not there, he wouldn't care. Because there's no customers in the store anyways. It's not like people are seeing you. It was just a matter of, basically the way the boomers think is that you have to, if you're not suffering at all times, you're not earning your paycheck. Like, that's the way boomers think. Gen Xers, in my experience, are more relaxed on that. And older millennials are more relaxed still. But yeah, boomers, they're the worst to work for. You should do a stream focused on Brazil like you did with C in Latin America in the past. See, the problem is that I could talk about Brazil in a general sense, I guess. But, and I was actually thinking, because if I do go down there for any period of time, and I was looking at the visa options, you can actually get a 90-day visa down there as a Canadian, and then you can extend it another 90 days. You could literally stay half the year in Brazil on a visitor visa, tourist visa, on arrival. So it's actually a pretty damn good deal. But if I ever do end up down there to test the waters out and see how it goes, I would definitely be doing streams. I might even get a GoPro or something and do live streams just walking around. That would be really fun, actually. I'd have to learn some Portuguese, but once I do, I can assess the landscape walking around. I have to do a Romania Eastern European stream first. I don't know about that. I guess I wouldn't mind visiting Europe for the actual sake of visiting it, but I really would not have high hopes on getting a woman there. Because as I've said, I'm a manlet, and probably most Eastern European countries, the average height is going to be taller than me, right? And it's not like, I guess I'm a Westerner, like I'm Western European ancestry, but that's not going to be visibly obvious. Right? Yeah, I do have a vape. That's another thing I've been able to afford again, is I can get a vape now. I hadn't had one in like 6 months just because I couldn't afford it. Because I had to budget literally everything. It was horrible. So I can now at least have one minor cope. The real troubled mind. Are you 5'8", Mercer? No, I'm actually 5'7.5". I round up as a joke. Like I'll say I'm like 5'7.999" repeating or some bullshit. But no, I'm not even 5'8". I'm like 5'7.5". So, my options as far as like height is a real limiting factor. And I'm not somebody who's like, I'm not like the cognizant manlet who, interesting guy, but he very much is a believer that height determines everything, more or less. I'm not somebody who believes that, because I have seen exceptions to this. Like I've seen, just in the time that I've been out in public again, I have seen manlets with girlfriends that are their height or even slightly taller than them, and we're talking good looking and race matched as well. Like they were both white. So it's not like height is everything, but height is a major factor. And more importantly, it's more so that women will exclude a priori men below their height or even at their height. Like typically most women will start acceptable men in terms of desirability at least an inch or two above them. At least. And that's like minimum. Which means that the closer you are to the average height of a woman in your country, it's like the death zone. Like once you cross that threshold, which I believe is around 5'7", you're going to be rejected by most women on the basis purely of being either shorter than them or too close to their height. So that's another element of Latin America that's nice, is that most of their countries are short. I mean, that's also true for Southeast Asia. But since height is my real phalo, like the biggest single phalo that I have, that would be one area that's ameliorated to a large extent. I think we're not that viable at sea now. I'm 5'9". Well, the problem with sea is that, first of all, Thailand, for example, they're really tightening their border policy now because, well, I mean, largely because of Indians, but also because of Russians and Chinese behaving badly or doing things they shouldn't be doing. So I think over time it's going to get more and more difficult to visit these countries and stay for extended periods of time. So you do have options in these countries, but another major factor is that these women are not stupid. Like they understand that if you're a foreigner and you don't speak Thai, the odds of you sticking around are going to be fairly slim from their point of view. And they're not going to take you seriously unless you are living there and you have some sort of proof of permanent residency. Like you can prove that you're going to be there for a long time. And also another factor, for any woman that's in any way respectable, you're going to have to know the language sufficiently that you can talk with her parents. She's not going to marry you or whatever if you can't talk with her parents. Now, you can probably get women to date in a casual sense, but I mean, if that's what you're looking for, I would say that that's sufficient. That's sufficient. But if you're looking for anything more than just being a novelty for a month or two for a girl, if you want to have an actual, like, intimate partner relationship, I would say Southeast Asia, there's going to be a lot more barriers to that. You know, Latin America is easier for that because they have social norms that are a lot more similar to what we're used to. And also, Portuguese, Spanish, those are way easier to learn if you're an English speaker than Thai is. Thai is completely alien. Portuguese and Spanish, I mean, there's a lot of words that are going to sound very similar. So, and the grammar is also going to be, it's Latin grammar, right? So it'd be much easier to pick up the language. Yeah. Every time I go out, one or two women will tower over me. Yeah, actually, what's funny is that I was commenting on this one couple I saw in Walmart. Or no, not in Walmart. It was at a mall near my place. And it was a woman that was with a man that was noticeably shorter than she was. And I thought, wow, this is like a manlet with a normal to slightly above average height woman. And then I encountered them later, and I only saw them at a great distance. Like I was on the other side of the mall, and it was like it was one of these strip malls with a really long hallway, basically, and then I was seeing them at the entrance. So I didn't actually have a good way of judging their actual size. But then I encountered them much more closely when I was in Walmart, which is beside the mall. And the guy was actually a little bit taller than me. He was like 5'8" or maybe 5'9", and the girl was over 6 feet tall. So even then, it's like, no, it's like tall women or whatever, they'll date average height men because it's less about the absolute height and it's more like how you compare to other men. If you're considered average height as a man, women will be a lot softer on you, even if they themselves are taller. Though taller women prefer taller men, obviously. It's much more important to be either average height or potentially taller than men. Other men, I mean. Like, that's the main factor that comes into play. Like, the woman's height is really of relative unimportance, I would say. Almost all women are my height or tower over me. It's brutal. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know if I would say that. Like, I know when I say that I'm 5'7.5", I mean, I literally measured myself to a very precise degree. I find a lot of guys, they overestimate their height, either due to unconscious bias or I call it Tinder inches, where they add some inches for Tinder. Where I've met guys who would describe themselves as 6 feet tall, and then they're only slightly taller than me. And I know that they're full of shit. They're like maybe 5'10" at most. But because they never bother to measure themselves, they just pretend that they're 6 feet tall. And this actually distorts a lot of women's perceptions. Because if I say that I'm 5'7.5" without them physically seeing me, they'll think that I'm like 5'4" or something. Whereas I've encountered women where I've talked to them and I've said my height and they were like, what? No way. You've got to be at least 5'9". No way. That's because there's so many guys that bullshit and inflate their numbers that like women have a completely distorted, and they do the same thing for penis size as well, by the way, where they'll have a completely distorted perception of size because so many guys lie about it, and so it inflates the number to a ridiculous degree. What's this? I can speak mango. Exorcism, what do you mean by speaking mango? What language is mango? Is that like Portuguese? I don't know. I mean, I started learning Spanish for a period of time, and then I stopped after a while because I just wasn't in any economic position to consider going elsewhere anyways. So I stopped learning Spanish, but I learned enough of it that I've retained some of the grammar and a lot of the nouns and verbs. And now that I've been trying to learn Portuguese, I keep running into a situation where they'll have like, instead of saying si, they say sim. Or instead of saying hermano, they'll say irmão. And it just, like, whenever I hear spoken Portuguese without reading it, it just sounds to me like really weird butchered Spanish. It's probably a very bad idea to try to learn Spanish and Portuguese at the same time because you're just going to confuse everything constantly because they sound so similar. Manlets need to measure their height in the morning. Yeah, because your spine decompresses, right? Like, that's just to help coping. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, I've heard conflicting things about Brazil. I've heard guys say in Brazil, JBW can be really powerful. But I've also heard in Brazil, like, a lot of guys say it's turning into one of the worst feminist shitholes in Latin America. I suspect that both of these things can be true, but it varies based on socioeconomic status. I think that the white middle to upper middle class women are probably as libtarded as European women. But I imagine that for the rest of the population that are Pardo or black or whatever, like some other racial mixture, and are also poorer, like these rules that, like the systems that allow for feminists to perpetuate themselves, or feminism to perpetuate itself, it requires a strong welfare state. It requires distribution of resources to women that allows women to live independently from men. And it requires men who are effectively removed from necessity, like being a necessity, due to the security and structure of the society being taken care of. I think outside of first world countries, that only exists with the upper class. So if you're an upper class, rich Brazilian woman, let's say, you can probably get some stupid desk job through a family connection or whatever, and you can get access to a university because you have the money to go, an international school. So you can effectively live the way that European women live, for the most part. And you live in like a gated community, so you don't have to worry about security issues. You don't have to worry about poverty because your family is rich. Like, these are the kind of women that do become European-style feminists. But the difference is that that's very much restricted to a small subsection of the population. The vast majority of the population, by necessity, cannot live that way. You know, if you're a Brazilian woman that's living in, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a favela. It could be like a lower middle class by Brazilian standards life. You still have to be very conscious about security because there's always a risk of crime. Police don't really enforce things well. You have to be concerned about interpersonal relationships because, again, the police presence is not universal, except for like really serious crimes. You know, there's a high chance that if you're the victim of a crime, that the criminal's going to get away with it. All these things mitigate the impact of, even if feminism is being promoted from the top down, it just is not able to filter in because of the material circumstances of the women on the ground. And this isn't just Brazil, this is all Latin American countries. I guarantee you all Latin American countries probably have the same. If you go to the upper classes, they're probably identical to how Spanish people live in Spain. And like wealthy white Latin American women are probably very similar to the typical Spanish woman in Spain, you know, or other European woman. You know, like the differences would be relatively minor. It's when you filter down into the median of the population, that's when the differences become more stark. That's my suspicion, anyways. I could be wrong. I'm gonna have to see for myself, but maybe Bilal Futurista can give us some clarity on that. Like, thing is, it's in the law, so you can't even escape it. You know, we're talking about the law, but who enforces the law? Like, if you look at some of these cities, the crime is so rampant in these cities. It's like the police force barely functions, you know? Now, I don't know about Brazil, but I'm talking more, because I know more about places like Colombia or Dominican Republic or Mexico, where you have large stretches of the country that are basically outside the control of the government. Like, the government doesn't really have any influence. I know in Rio, at least from, again, like I've watched, you know, Kaz, the South African German guy who travels around. Like, I remember that when he went to, I forget if it was Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, but he went to one of these cities and he went through the slums of the city, which are in the hilltop area, and it's like a complete war zone. It's like the police engage in constant skirmishes, like it's like a front line of a war, where they like it's like Ukraine and Russia, where they'll do like a push towards a certain section that's controlled by the drug cartels, and they'll shoot and kill a bunch of people, and then they'll retreat when it becomes they can't hold the line, and then they go back to the line of the demilitarized line or whatever. Yeah, Kurt Kass, that's it. I'm also in the U.S. and I don't see it often, but it changes a lot by state. Oh, so you're not in Brazil right now, Bilal. Okay, so maybe I don't know. You could still give us some information, maybe. Your comment towards women in the trade about male and female body composition wasn't very bright. I would have known just to tell her what she wants to hear. Yeah, that's easy to say in hindsight, but when you're conversing with somebody, and it had been a while since I had been in a woke employment situation, like where I was working in a woke place. And it actually, to me, it didn't seem like the place was woke, because it was like a blue collar type of job. And typically those places are not, obviously you can't say anything too chuddy, but like acknowledging that men and women are physically different. That's a little bit different. At least that's what I thought. Clearly that wasn't the case. I hadn't thought much about it. And it seemed to me like she was aware of these differences based on the fact that she found it really, like she was perfectly willing to say that women are guaranteed jobs in these fields, but men aren't, just because of the affirmative action policies. Like, it struck me that she was maybe not sympathetic, but she at least acknowledged that these realities exist. But of course it was foolish in hindsight. I shouldn't have said anything. Well, actually, I'm kind of glad I did now, because I have a better job now than what I was doing then. But still, it was disheartening, because I thought at a minimum, like when I was talking in the back of my mind afterwards, I was like, ooh, this is probably kind of risky to say. But I figured, worst case scenario, I would get like a talking to, and maybe I'd get like a warning or whatever, and then I would just apologize and, have to prostrate myself. But of course, they'll just fire you straight off now. Like, it's actually gotten, institutional woke has actually gotten worse. Whereas for me, I've noticed that cultural woke has receded a lot in Canada. And maybe in my mind, I was thinking cultural woke has really been pushed back on, especially due to the immigration issue, that maybe it's safer to talk about these things now in general. At least when it comes to like men are men and women are women, and that there are physical differences between men and women. Turns out I was wrong. So I don't know, man. I think most incels couldn't handle Latinas with Asians who share the same high and hip high IQ. Maybe. That's possible. That's why I said that Brazil is on my short list, but it's not the only thing on my list. I want to try a couple different places, but I have a feeling that I would prefer Brazil the most, because contrary to popular, well, I don't know, actually. In my case, I'm not actually like inhibited, I suppose you could say. Like, I can talk to people without it being a problem. Just like what I'm doing right now. Probably I'm relatively introverted by normie standards, but not by all that much. And especially if people are approachable and you can talk to them. Like, here's the thing about Canada, okay? In Canada, not just women, though women in particular, but people in general are extremely unapproachable. Extremely unapproachable. Socializing is extremely difficult in Canada. Like, people in general are unfriendly. They're locked off. They don't want to talk to each other. They don't want to interact. And again, I could be wrong about this, but at least the impression that I've gotten, just speaking with a lot of different Latinos and Latin Americans, is that they have their own problems, but one of the problems they don't have is this extreme inhibition and standoffishness and hostility to interaction. Like, if I could go out and interact with women, and they're at least pleasant to talk to, and they don't immediately give me fuck off vibes, I would be quite content with that. It doesn't even mean that they would have to be open to dating me or whatever. Just being able to interact with them would be a huge step up from now. Where if you interact with somebody, this is a conversation I was having on my Discord. If you interact with somebody, you could, like, the way I thought about it, because I remember talking to a woman, I had a reason for doing it. Like, I had to tell her about something that was happening. I forget exactly what it was. It was like something construction related. Anyways, when I actually had to approach and get her attention, she gave me a look like I had just strangled a kitten in front of her. Like, she gave me this horrified look, like, oh my God, I'm being talked to. Oh my God. And this was a Zoomer girl. Now, it could be because I'm horrifying to look at. I don't think that's the case, because at least when I've been in public and sat down in public, women have not avoided sitting down beside me. I can't be that repulsive if women are willing to at least sit down beside me, when there were other options available. So I don't think it's because I'm that repulsive. But it's just that they're so, especially Zoomers, are so socially anxious and so neurotic that you just can't interact with them. They just get terrified of interaction. And that creates an enormous amount of isolation. If I could just get away from that, and I could get into an environment where I can talk to people without that kind of reaction, even if it's just like a basic bitch, pleasant, oh, hey, how you doing? Let's sit down and, whatever. I could just sort of walk up and introduce myself to somebody. That would be such a huge step up in quality of life. Poor people live, so changes a lot by region, so you'd have to be careful with that. There's an interesting video, and I would recommend it, but it's in Portuguese. Well, I think I can do automatic translations nowadays. I think you can get that on YouTube. Where you can... yeah, it's in like the gear section. Not every video has it, but there are a lot of videos that do. I feel most people don't want to socialize with strangers in general now. Everybody's glued to their phones. Yeah, that's true. And there was this story I remember reading. It's from a while ago. It's from like 2017 or something. But there was this guy who was running a bar in America. And there was an exposed copper wire above the bar. Like in the roof. Not on the roof, but it's like in the ceiling part of the bar. Or it was like just above it, there was like drywall or something, and then there was this exposed wire. And it would disrupt all the cellular signals. And as a result, people couldn't get mobile data and connect to the internet. And as a result, because of that lack of ability to connect inside the bar, people would be much more social just out of necessity, because it takes more of an anxiety-inducing thing to introduce yourself to somebody and talk to them than it is to just sit on your phone, right? It's easier to do. Like, sitting on your phone is easier than talking to other people. But then once you actually get past that initial inhibition, and that's easy to do in a bar because there's alcohol, once you get past that, you're then able to interact with people, talk with them more, and it becomes a much more enjoyable experience than just sitting on your phone, drinking a beer that's overpriced, sitting on your phone, and then going home. And as a result, his bar actually became more popular than it otherwise was. And I think that could be the case in these countries as well, especially if they don't have global... I don't know about Brazil. Like, if Brazil has... internet connectivity across the whole country for mobile data. But if they don't, that's probably a good thing. Foids on Discord act super anxious and scared, and it's probably the safest place to talk to for the most part. Well, they're also overwhelmed with the number of guys that are going to be interested in them, right? Like, if you identify yourself as a woman on Discord, unless you're in some sort of very heavily curated server, there's going to be like 10 guys that instantly start jumping in your DMs begging for attention. So there's probably an element of inhibition there, where they're just like, they just don't want to interact with all these dudes at the same time. Being an introvert is a death sentence in Latin culture unless you look Spaniard. Well, I mean, I'm French and Scottish, so I look... And I look... Actually, it's weird. I've been told that I look very Irish, and then I've also been told by people that I look very Slavic. Like, I look Russian. So I've gotten that from both sides. It's kind of funny. There's one guy saw me when I shaved my head, and he said I look like some kind of Russian mobster or something, like a Russian gang member. I actually look... it's funny, because I sound... very different from how I look. I look a lot meaner than I sound. Like, for the most part, you guys would say, if you saw me, my face does not match my voice at all. So, it's kind of funny, but... As an adult guy, the only place I can still socialize are bars. Sadly, I don't drink. Yeah, I used to drink, but it's so expensive now that it's just an enormous waste of money these days. And I don't even know if there's many... Because Zoomers don't drink. Right? Zoomers will smoke weed. They won't drink alcohol. And so you're pretty much dealing with like 30 plus at bars now. And there's usually more dudes than women by a substantial margin. And it's funny because I also know that I'm a good conversationalist in person. Like I can socialize in person pretty well. And the way that I know this to be the case is because I have sat down at bars and chatted with people, and I've had drinks bought for me. Just chatting with people. Of course, they've all been dudes who bought me drinks, but they just enjoyed the conversation so much. They're like, here, let me get you a drink. So it's not that I'm socially malformed or maladjusted in some way. Like it's other issues, right? Of course, I've never had that experience with women. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever had a significant conversation with a woman at a bar because they just don't like talking to. Usually, they're either at a bar with a guy, or they're going to be in a group on their own, and they do not want to interact with men. Right? That's been my experience. Javier, why Brazil out of all Latin American countries? Colombian women are the most attractive overall. Well, the problem is that all these Latin American countries, if we're talking about the ones that have desirable women in them, they're pretty much all saturated by foreigners. Brazil is relatively untouched by long-term foreigners because it's so huge. It's such a gigantic country that outside of Sao Paulo and probably, Rio de Janeiro and probably Sao Paulo, you're going to be probably the only foreigner from a European country, I'm not European citizenship-wise, but I mean from like a Western European background, purely. You're probably going to be like the only one or maybe one of a handful in like an entire city of people. In many cities in those countries, and it's not just like the shitty ones that are in the north, because the north is it's kind of like Turkey. Western Turkey is basically a first world country. Other than the currency collapse that's happening there due to Erdogan's deliberate policy, because Erdogan's really stupid. Other than him doing that, like Western Turkey itself is basically a first world country. It's like it's on the same par as like Poland, or I would even say it's a little more developed than Poland, because Istanbul is such a economically powerful city that it really brings up all of Eastern Turkey economically. But Eastern Turkey is basically like Iraq. It's basically like a desert shithole, to be honest with you. And Brazil is kind of like that too, where the southern part of Brazil and the middle part of Brazil is pretty decent, but then as you get into the north, it starts getting really bad. Like it starts looking like East St. Louis, or Detroit, kind of similar. As a Gen Z man, I do not drink anymore, but when I did, it was usually alone after wage slaving. Yeah, same here. If I do drink now, which is rare, like I might feel like a beer maybe once every couple of weeks or whatever, I'll just buy some for myself and I'll drink at home. A lot of people say that's depressing or whatever. I've never found that myself. I find that it's not really worth the money and the I guess you could say like the calories, because alcohol has a lot of calories in it. Like one of the reasons why boomers are so fat is because they drank so much and they still chronically drink. Like every obese boomer I know has a beer habit and drinks a lot of beer or whatever, whiskey. So I would say it's not really worth it. But generally speaking, I would enjoy if I had like 2 or 3 beers or whatever. Or maybe sometimes what I used to do is I used to get these small bottles of sake or of soju, which is like, soju is like a fortified wine as they call it. So it's somewhat stronger than regular wine. It's like 20%. And then I would mix it in with some Monster. It's a really bad idea in hindsight. Mixing caffeinated drinks with alcohol is an extremely bad idea. Shouldn't do that. Because I ended up, and I used to drink that a lot, because I would get like the buzzed feeling from alcohol, but without the slowed down motor coordination and the general sluggishness. But then I started to get heart palpitations from it. And that's when I stopped. I was like, okay, this is feeling really friggin' weird. I'm going to stop doing this. I wouldn't recommend it. And yeah, Javier, by the way, another issue with Colombia is Colombia is known for a lot of shenanigans. You know, like if you go to Colombia, there's entire industries that are designed around drugging foreign men who are trying to get with the local women, and then just robbing them and stealing all their shit and leaving. And it's not just the foreigners either. Like Elzak, who's the guy that I interviewed in my Latin America stream. He actually, and this was a while after the stream, he had told us that he actually had his phone and wallet stolen when he went on a date. He went on a date with a woman, and she brought some wine, and she turns out that there was something in the wine, because he ended up, the next thing he remembers after that point was waking up in a taxi cab, like the back of a taxi cab, and he's missing his phone and his wallet. And it wasn't a cheap phone either. It was like an iPhone or something. So that shit happens quite a lot. And, I mean, in Brazil, like, my understanding of Brazil is that it is crime. Okay, it's much more opportunistic in Brazil. Like, crime is not as organized as it is in some of these other Latin American countries. That's my understanding. Like, I'm sure that there exists like organized gangs in certain areas that will like try and drug and rob foreigners, but it's much more prevalent just per capita, let's say, in Colombia than in Brazil, because Colombia is a much more popular destination. You know, Brazil, like, there are people that'll go there, but for some reason it just hasn't been a passport bro hotspot. I'm not sure why, but is the richest part of Turkey better than the richest part of Brazil? I don't know, but I do know that in certain parts of Western Turkey, like, I think it's Kocaeli, I think is the name of it. It has like a per capita income of like $80,000 US or something. Like, there's a lot of money in and this is a province that's right outside of I keep wanting to say Constantinople. It's the province right outside of Istanbul. So it's in Anatolia, but it's to the east of Istanbul. And then Edirne, which is to the west of Istanbul. This is Rumelia, that province that's in Europe. That's also quite wealthy. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's wealthier than its neighbors. Like, Edirne is wealthier than Bulgaria and Turkey. Or Bulgaria and Greece, I'm pretty sure. No wife, no GF, no job. I don't care anymore. Yeah, I can feel that, Guava. I mean, I got a job, but still no GF, still no wife. God, my boss once asked me when I was working. He's like, "Do you have any kids?" And I answered, "Not that I'm aware of." Just trying to play it off. But I'm like, bro, if you had any idea how much of a lack of experience I have and how big of a gap between our lives there are. Like, you'd probably feel bad for me, so I'd rather keep things upbeat. So I'm not gonna say I'm like a total subhuman incel. You went to Medellin. Is Medellin? Do you mean isn't it Medellin or something like that? Is that what you mean? Because I know Medellin, I think, and it's like Medellin is how it's spelled. That's a really popular geomax spot that has become notorious. Yeah, no, when they say do you have kids, man, that's sad. It's like, fuck. I keep forgetting my age because I feel like a 20-year-old, because it's like my life never progressed beyond that point, right? In terms of going through life stages. So then when I realize, oh shit. And then I think, that's a weird question. And then I realize, oh, actually, by the time that my father was my age, he was already married, and he had, I think, 3 girls by the time that he was my age. So, have you ever tried to get a GF? I've noticed most incels have never even asked a girl out. Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I first went to college, I used to go to parties. There was this one Indian girl that kissed me, I think, on a dare. And other than that, I didn't have any luck. Just weren't really interested. Admittedly, I wasn't looks maxed or anything. I could have been thinner, I suppose. But no, I did try. I remember like as far back as when I was 12. I made some friends at a playground, and there was this girl that I was really attracted to at the time, who was about my age, and I forget exactly how it happened, but on a dare, I'm pretty sure we kissed on a dare. So actually, in terms of when I lost my kiss virginity, that was at like 12. So I'm a Chad in that regard, but other than that, no. And I haven't had any luck since then. That was back when I was around 25. This is when I was first in college. Since then, nothing. I mean, look, I've gone on apps and I've gotten likes from women, but they've been, I mean, okay, standard cell, I suppose, vol cell, but like these are women that were just like gigantically fat, covered in tattoos, single moms. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Just couldn't do it. Sorry. Nominal or PPP GDP? This would be PPP at this point. I would say, like, when I saw Coachelle, when I was looking into Turkey, that was, like, back in 2018. So that was back before the inflation got really bad. Nowadays, Coachelle's income is probably a lot lower because of how inflation has fucked the country. But in terms of PPP, it's probably still pretty high. Is your problem height or face? I would say it's height for the most part. And NT is a little bit difficult. I wouldn't say I'm NT, but I wouldn't say I'm like too far off the mark, because I can code switch to normie and behave like a normie fairly decently. But the problem is Canada is one of the worst cultures in the world when it comes to socializing. Like you'll see if you look at interviews of immigrants, including, there's actually, when I was doing a bit of research into Brazil, I came across this Brazilian guy, and I would say he was, first of all, he was a white Brazilian, and he looked like a Spaniard or Portuguese. So he was one of those types. So he's like a Southern European looking Brazilian. And he was being interviewed by this woman where he was talking about his experiences in Canada over the last 10 years. And he was just saying, like, the social norms are just horrible. It's awful to try and connect with anybody. Dating is awful. And not just as a man, just in general. Like women as well, because there's no way to interact with people without it violating their personal space in some way. And everybody has their headphones in. And you know what, by the way, I'm including myself here. I do the same thing. I mean, I'm part of this. You know, this is what I grew up in. It's very closed off unless you already know people. Like, trying to enter into a social community is extremely difficult in Canada. If you're excluded from them, it's very difficult to get in. So, 30 years ago, you would have your 1.5 kids in a Walmart supervisor job with a house and garden. Yeah, probably. I remember reading somewhere in Canada, a senior developer in Canada now makes less than a Walmart supervisor would in the United States. That's how bad the situation's gotten. I don't have smartphones, so I'm not guilty. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know how you can interact with people, with women under 35, or I'd say women under 40 now, without having a smartphone. Because like 90% of interactions with women now are going to be via text. You know, or maybe calling. I would say if you're looking for personal interaction, yeah, it'd be very difficult. What do you think about Australia? People from Brazil say that the best place to geomax are Brazil and Russia. What do you mean Australia? Well, I would say if you're looking to make money quickly without like an advanced degree in some pre-existing offer, getting into Australia and working in the mines in Australia is a way to save a lot of money fast. Like if you did that for 5 years, you could bank even a couple $100,000. But other than that, Australia, from what I've talked to Australians about, they also say that it's actually. I actually have a personal anecdote from Australia that I can recall. I remember this girl who was from the United Arab Emirates, and she had gone to Australia for student visa. This was all the way back in like 2014. This is before Trump, 2013. She went to Australia on a student visa. She was an Emirati citizen, so she was an Arab. And she told me, and I was interacting with her. She was over here afterwards. This was after she had gone to Canada instead. And she had told me that when she arrived in Australia, the first thing she noticed was how cold everyone was towards each other. Not just towards her, but in general. And she said that the one thing she missed the most about the Middle East and the United Arab Emirates was basically how she was being pandered to by, especially by men, ironically. The Gulf Arab men are very simpy towards the women. Like, they will be very nice to them. They'll treat them with kid gloves all the time because their culture is very much like patriarchal in that kind of way. Like, yeah, the women have certain restrictions on them. They can't do certain things. But in exchange, the men are also very simpy towards them and treat them very nicely. Pander to them a lot. You know, oh, are you stressed out? Here, you could just take a break. Don't worry about it. Like, that sort of thing. Like, in interviews, they'll be super nice and coddly towards them. And she was like, she missed that the most. And even the girls, she said, like, and she was a woman, she's interacting with Australian women, and she found them extremely off-putting and cold and harsh. So I don't know. I would say Brazilians. Maybe if you're like a Chad Riguez Brazilian, because the problem is that men are so terrified of offending women in Western countries like Australia. Due to how women react when they're approached by a man that they don't like. Like, Western men are kind of traumatized into being terrified of even approaching or expressing interest in a woman. If you're Brazilian or Latin American and you grew up in a culture where you could just freely approach women and interact with them, and they won't just automatically freeze up or like have a resting bitch face or get angry at you for daring to talk to them. You could probably, there's probably a significant number of women that you could get as a man that are simply not approached because of how terrified men are. And if you don't have that fear due to being Brazilian, maybe that's a niche, I would say. But I think that there's still a looks level you have to match. They call it Chadstralia for a reason. I'm Brazilian, we aren't cucks, we're always hitting on them. Even my grandpa tried to bang young girls. You know what's funny? My former landlord, who's in his 60s, I remember that we were sitting in his front porch, and this 40-year-old woman was walking her dog across the street. And I remember him saying something about like, I'm kind of a dirty old man, but I'd want to tap that, or something along those lines. And I'm thinking to myself, bro, actually, no, I said this to him. I didn't put it exactly in these words, but this is what I was thinking. I put it in more diplomatic words, but I was thinking like, bro, she's fucking 40 years old. She's postmenopausal. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Or, well, not postmenopausal, but she can't even produce children anymore. Okay? Like, what the hell are you talking about that you're some kind of dirty old man? This bitch is an old woman. She's just slightly less old than you are. That's the psychology of people. You know? They're really terrified of it. Australian men don't really care about women, but they say it is because there's so many women in Australia that they don't pursue. I have not heard about that. I don't know anything about that. I would imagine, if anything, due to the recent immigration they've had, the immigration flood from India, they're probably going to have more men now than women. But they're going to be mostly Indians. Because India has a similar problem with China, where they produced a ton of these excess boys because they abort their daughters. So whenever you have like labor migration from India, it's going to overwhelmingly be composed of men. Like I think in Canada it's 70% men or something. If you look at the male-female breakdown of migrants from India into Canada. And as a result, they just swamp everything. And I remember at the peak of the Jeet wave in Canada, you would see these mobs, like these crowds of Indian men just roaming around staring at women, never interacting with them. But they're staring at women and just sort of wandering around public spaces. And there's no women. They're all dudes. And they just sort of look kind of sullen and whatever. But I'm like, is this what India is like? Where you just have these packs of dudes roaming around because there's so many men and no women due to abortion, that they're just roaming around looking pissed off because they can't get, like they were hoping to steal our women, but our women are not interested in them for the most part. Canada gender ratio is 107 men to 100 women. Look at the gender ratio specifically for 18 to 35-year-olds, and you'll get something like 1.15 or 1.2. Like, we actually have a substantial oversupply of men now due to all of these fucking student visa jeets. That's what it is. It's awful. And we are now taking steps to, like, there was recently a thing where the PR pathways that existed in Canada for visa jeets have just recently gotten removed in a few provinces. But all that's going to happen is they're going to migrate to the provinces that still allow a permanent residency pathway through student visa, and they're just going to do it there instead. Like, we have no political way of solving this, just due to the legal structure of the society. Yeah. I will take even a 60-year-old woman if I can bust nuts. Who cares? It's all this. That's funny. That reminds me of. Let's see if I can find it. But yeah, if you guys want to send me anything, join my Discord server. I'll pass you through, and you can send me what you're talking about. Because yeah, one of the reasons why I did my Latin America stream is that I noticed there is this peculiar absence of Hispanics in Latin America in these circles. Like, you'll find Asians, you'll find Europeans, you'll find South Asians, you'll find Middle Easterners. We have those too. But Hispanics are quite rare. And it was a mystery as to why. Like, why is it that they don't seem to have the same issues? You know, that's kind of what drew me to... That's what drew me to the demographic pill, actually. It was initially trying to... At first, I was starting with... they have these embedded communities. Here, it is what I was looking for. This is from a Japanese forum, a Japanese-Canadian forum. Is Brampton too intense for most Japanese people? I am horrified by the body odor of Indian people, their littering, and their strong sexual desire to surprise snuggle even a 60-year-old black woman. That's what you made me think of. This was in Japanese, by the way, and I had it translated, so that's why the wording is kind of strange. What was even the stream supposed to be about? We're just complaining about being incels. Well, that's what the stream is about. I'm probably going to change the title of it afterwards because the stuff that I was going to talk about, the Henry Nowak stuff, that kind of already got resolved by the time that I started the stream. You know, because it was a hot news 2 weeks and a half ago. But nowadays, it's like, yeah, then Belfast happened. And then the Irish thing happened with the Irish women locking their arms to protect a migrant that stabbed a bunch of children. all this shit happened. And, I mean, I already said my bit on that, right? There's not really much else to say about it. I mean, the Iran war ending, though, the Iran war, I thought about talking about that, but I think it's going to be one of these scenarios, because I remember I made a prediction. I said, look, the U.S. is going to have to exit this thing with Iran basically winning it unambiguously. And if they try and do that, Israel will rebel against the peace agreement, and they will try and destroy all of the oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf in order to make this victory as costly for Iran as possible, even if it just harms the rest of the world. Right? Because their only concern is punishing Iran as much as they can, because they know that their oil and gas supply is guaranteed by America. Now, it does seem like Trump is tepidly sort of tiptoeing towards criticism of Israel. And it would be interesting to see if this continues. But I am somewhat skeptical. Like, if this peace deal holds up, I would be amazed. I think it's inevitable that one will have to be signed, but it'll have to be once all the oil and gas industry is fucking destroyed in Israel, or in the Gulf. Like, that's the only way I could see this peace treaty happening. What's this? It's because they don't speak English, I think. Are you talking about the Indians? Imagine being a G.I. Joe in Vietnam, busting nuts and the girls, cucking their men and fathers. Brutal. Yeah, kind of, but if you actually look at what happened in Vietnam, I remember I did a video on this in Women in the Political, I believe, where I talked about Vietnam. And how Vietnam, once the North Vietnamese won that war and they forced the U.S. out, the mixed-race kids that were the product of American soldiers and Vietnamese women were basically ostracized in the society. And their mothers were also ostracized. And you also see Vietnam to this day is the most conservative country when it comes to women in Southeast Asia. And the conservatism increases as you go further north. Which again tells me that this was very much a victory of the Vietnamese men. They won by locking their borders off from foreign men, which is their number one threat. It's worth the economic sacrifice. Even though they've been poor consistently for a very long time, it was worth that sacrifice for those men, anyways. Trump is paying $300 billion to Iran while their GDP is like $50 billion. That's equivalent of a country paying the U.S. $27 trillion relative terms to the GDP. I think it'd be even more than that. It'd be more like, because I think that's 6 times, right? The U.S. economy, I think, is around, isn't it like 10 trillion? Something like that. I'm gonna look it up actually. USA. USA. Their GDP is 32 trillion. No, yeah, 32 trillion. Their GDP is 32 trillion. So it would be equivalent to 32 times 6, which is like 192 trillion, which, obviously is not realistic, but that would be roughly what it is. So, the absence of Hispanics in the BP sphere. Okay, I see what you're saying. Maybe. I don't know. Well, you'd have to tell me, because you speak Portuguese, right? And we have some Hispanics here who speak Spanish. Is there an actual, Latin American BP sphere? Because I remember finding this this Latin American 4chan version. I think it was called Hispa-chan or something like that. And it mostly was just shitposting, but I didn't see a lot of incel-y stuff on there. It was mostly just shitting on each other's countries, calling each other black or India or whatever, right? Like they would call Argentinians Argentinians, Brazilians are apezillions, like that sort of thing. I didn't see much talk about women, really. Relationships are overrated. I'd rather spend my time playing violin, video games, or hanging out with friends or read books. I can understand that. But you know, it's interesting. Because I was, a little while ago, I was on a bus. And a ricefoid sat down beside me for the second time in a row. Because this was over the course of 2 days. She sat beside me second time in a row. And it felt a little bit like maybe it was intentional, and it just occurred to me, like I wasn't going to do anything, but it occurred to me like, what happens if I were to talk to this girl and we hit it off and maybe it goes somewhere? And then I was thinking like how this alters all of your life plans, like how you imagine the future to be. If you're bound up with someone else, suddenly they and what you can create together becomes becomes the component, the dominant component of what you imagine your future to be. And then when you think about what you are as an individual, as a man, if you're not attached to a woman, and therefore you have no future that includes, for example, having a family, integrating into a community with that family, you're just drifting as an individual. You're just drifting. Like existence itself almost becomes meaningless. You know, there was this passage in, what was it called? Gotta be careful what I say. On Self-Deletion by Emil Durkheim, who I've referenced before in previous streams, where he talks about how the liberal society, because it stops imposing itself onto the population, where it doesn't give people a reason to be, you know. Whereas if you think of an older illiberal society, it's like the state exists to give you a purpose. Like it will tell you, like it will claim ownership of your life. Those are the words that he used. Like your life does not simply belong to you. Your life belongs to the society. It belongs to the nation, and you are not free to dispose of it. You must fulfill your role in the society. Like it's both an imposition of obligations and also a sense of it's obligations, and then it's also like a sense of belonging. Like you belong to this community and you have a role to play in this community. You do not have a right to take your own life, for example. Whereas when the community becomes liberalized and individualized, and the state, the government, permits you to surrender your own life, like it as a function of the liberal state, liberalism, it cannot impose anything on you as an individual. Like the liberal state exists to maximize your individual freedoms, and in those states, the suicide rate for I said it. God damn it. The self-deletion rate. If the stream gets taken down, okay, I'm not going to restream it. You're just going to have to deal with it being cut off. Anyways, the self-deletion rate actually goes up in these liberal states because the men in particular lose the attachments that bind them to the world, and suddenly seeing like self-deleting is not such a huge thing because there's very few things fettering you to this life. And then if suffering pushes you beyond a certain point, you just can self-delete. And as a result, you see in these liberal societies, even if they're wealthier and more comfortable and more stable, you see the self-deletion rate go up. And I think being freed from bonds like, say, a significant other, or a family, let's say, that you're a part of, like this reduces your attachments to this world, you know, and then it becomes easier to disconnect from it in a permanent way, you know. It just occurred to me, like the feeling that I had when I was imagining if I guess this is an inky trait. This is like a number one inky trait where somebody interacts with you briefly, some woman interacts with you briefly, and you suddenly find yourself like fantasizing your entire future with them in kind of a rather sad way. It's not like I was like actively like, like morose about it or whatever, but I was just sort of thinking in my head. I was just thinking like, I wonder how my perception would differ if this was the circumstance. And it just occurred to me, like, the way I would think about everything would change, you know? Like, I wouldn't just, like, when I envision myself right now, I'm just sort of thinking, like, I guess I'll go somewhere that's cheaper if I can get a remote job, and I'll be more comfortable to, I don't know, do whatever, I guess. Whereas if you're bound up with another person, you're going to be thinking entirely about, like, what is our future together going to look like? Like, we need to find somewhere that is nice, and then maybe we can create a family and have a community, and you know what I mean? Like, and it becomes a completely different set of assessments compared to when you're single. But, why can't I play Victoria 3 IRL? Because you're not a member of Davos. Maybe if you were a globalist, maybe you could get in, but I'm sorry, you weren't born a banker's son. Yeah, Vic 3 is life. Yeah, that is definitely an inky trait. If you play Paradox games in any capacity, I would say that Hearts of Iron is sort of a little bit of a bridge between normie nerd and terminal incel nerddom. But other Paradox games, especially games like Victoria, it's over for you. If you play Victoria, this is like a sign. I have never touched a woman in my life. If I see somebody, if I click on their Steam profile and I see Victoria 2 or Victoria 3 has a lot of playtime, I'm like, I know this dude doesn't get bitches because I know my own kind. I know my own kind. It says, if a man can't get a woman in a house, he'll be a deviant, and they count on that. By using liberalism, most brown races will keep working like NPCs and function perfectly, unlike whites being depressed. I don't know, man. Like it had occurred to me, and this was something else. It was a script I never finished because, you know, I can never finish anything. But the for countries in Latin America, like when you look at cartels, we see these horrifying ways that cartels will murder people. And you think, why would anybody sign up to be part of that? Where you're running a high risk that you're going to end up with your face carved off and fed to you or something. And then you think, well, if you're born in a favela or whatever, or a barrio, whatever they call them in Spanish part, and you have no prospects, like you have no means of having anything but a miserable subsistence existence through legitimate means, then taking a gamble on joining a cartel and getting access to that fast money, you realize that this is how you can actually make it. Like, this is the only way you can make it in those societies. And it's the same for the radical Islamists in Algeria, in Egypt, in Syria, etc. You know, al-Jolani, who's the current ruler of Syria, he was a doctor, or he was studying to be a doctor in Syria. And he joined the radical Islamist movement, I think it was in 2006 or something. And it's probably because... And we know, if you look at his politics now, like he cut a deal with the United States when he got captured initially by the United States. He cut a deal with them that he would just basically govern as a libtard once he gained power somewhere, as long as the Americans recognized his government. That's effectively the deal that he made. And hang on, I just got a $1 from Normal Guy. Well, thank you very much, Normal Guy. Let me see. How did you send that? Was it through Ko-Fi? Oh, hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's like $15 in Leaf Box or something. I can put a down payment on a house with that. Anyways, where was I at? I'm trying to think. Where was I? Oh yeah, Jelani. He cut a deal with the Americans, and you can tell as he's running right now. He's basically a secular warlord that's pretending to be religious. And based on that, it's not like he got older and then suddenly just became a complete opportunist. Like, he probably had a realization at some point. And he's intelligent, too, because he was studying to be a medical doctor. And you don't become the leader of a powerful Islamist faction without having some brains and being able to operate and fight organized governments for power, which is what he did. He must have realized at some point that if he continued his studies as a doctor in Syria, the best that he could possibly get is like a mediocre existence. You know, maybe he'd have a wife and kids, but his standard of living would basically be as bad as like a Walmart wagey in a Western country. You know, quality of life would be dog shit. And he thought, well, I can continue doing with this, or I can join this Islamist faction, take a huge risk, high chance of dying, but if I do win, the sky is the limit for what I could gain. And that's what he did, and that's what he's the ruler of a country. And as these opportunities recede, as men lose access to legitimate ways of achieving their basic goals in life, you're going to see more and more of these guys go for more and more extreme alternatives. And to be honest with you, Jacked Up, I gotta say, if anything, I would have to say that whites are actually more NPC-ish than browns. Like, I find that whites are more willing to live under occupation and just be a wagey. Whereas browns, I don't know if it's an impulse thing or if it's whatever, they're more willing to engage in high-risk criminal behavior. That's just been my experience. Like, I can tell you, Canadians, if you look at what we've done, like what we've allowed to happen to our countries, I don't think any other group would be willing to tolerate what we've tolerated, being inflicted on us. And part of me wonders if the reason why Latin American countries aren't to the same degree fucked as we are is because they have even the whites there have some non-white admixture, and maybe there's a genetic component to this that it gives them a certain degree of ethnocentric awareness. Maybe not actual ethnocentrism, but just like awareness of their political identity in a way that whites are just blind to. Yeah. Never caught you live before. Happy to be here. You're based as AF. Thank you, Ticonian. Appreciate it. Yeah, that guy will get in. We're not going to be doing entry by donations anymore, but like I'll let you in just because you seem fine to me. Anyone who wants to join, you can just join the Discord. And if you've been in my chats and interacting with me consistently, like if you didn't just show up yesterday, that's sufficient to be allowed in. So, but I'm not going to be looking at that until after my stream is done, because I don't want to mess up my UI. The cartels and ISIS will often provide you with women, which is a huge motivating factor for low-status men. 100% correct, Mark Hansen. 100% correct. As a matter of fact, I think that was one of the main issues with ISIS, was that they were kidnapping women from minority populations and basically like marrying them off to their fighters. And, you know, it was pretty grisly things that would happen, of course. I mean, ISIS, obviously, it's a brutal regime, but the very fact that they were able to get so many people willing to fight and die for them tells you the conditions of their countries. Have you heard the idea that whites remove their criminal element throughout history, making them more rule-following and less risk-taking? I'm not so sure about that. Like, I do think that played a role. But I think if it was that substantial, you would see that across the board in all civilized societies. You would also see this in the Middle East. The Middle East should be even more so like that than Europe, because the Middle East was civilized for a lot longer in terms of organized agricultural societies. Like if you think of not Babylon, Sumeria, ancient Egypt, they had organized societies that would be able to mass execute criminals in a systematic way for a much, much longer time than Europeans had. And as a matter of fact, there's some evidence that proneness to alcoholism, that is actually most reduced in populations that have had agriculture for the longest. It's selected against in agricultural societies, and because agriculture arrived relatively late to Europeans, compared to other, I guess you could call them advanced races, I don't know, like races that developed advanced civilizations. Because it arrived relatively late to Europeans, they didn't have as much time to select against those alcoholism-related genetic elements, which is why alcoholism is higher in Europe than, say, in Asia or even in the Middle East. I know that Islam plays a role there as well, but if anything, Islam should have preserved alcoholism-related genetic traits, because there would be no selection against them. Because the selection is because when people have access to abundant resources and they have a proneness to alcoholism, they will consume a lot of alcohol and it will kill them off at a very early age. Right? That's the reason why these traits were selected against in these agricultural societies. Blacks have the least stress tolerance, which is why you see them crash out all the time. I don't know. I don't know, because, I would have to see trait neuroticism by race. And to be honest, I would probably suspect that blacks have lower neuroticism than whites. Though I would also say whites probably have lower neuroticism than Asians. Because neuroticism is correlated strongly with conscientiousness. And blacks tend to have a fairly low level of conscientiousness, which also translates into low levels of neuroticism. I think the reason why you see blacks crash out like that more so than whites is because that's more of like an impulse control thing, where they're more prone to react without thinking about it first. And we're talking about Americans, of course. It could be different in Africa because, not all blacks are the same. There's quite a bit of genetic diversity, so it could be different in different groups. But as far as African Americans go, I'm pretty sure what the situation is. Brazil is super annoying when it comes to politics. You're either red or blue. Everyone will ask you where you stand. Yeah, that's I'm pretty sure, didn't they have a president, or I think it was a president named Bolsonaro who got imprisoned? He did like this half-hearted attempt to do a coup, and it resulted in him just getting imprisoned because he sort of bitched it out and didn't bother like taking it seriously. And the South Korean president did the same thing. He did like a half-assed, bitched out coup attempt, and all it did was land him in prison. Like we need some proper right-wing dictators. At least with Pinochet and with Trujillo and stuff, they took power through force, through the military, and they just fucking ran things. Nowadays, we have these guys that are just like, they'll like declare that they're doing a coup or something, or that it's a state of emergency, and then they'll beg the military to do something, and the military is just like, fuck no, I'm not doing anything. And then they just sort of are standing there and they don't know what to do. That's what happened to the South Korean guy. And he was actually the Inky president. He was the one that got voted in by the Inkies. I don't know what he was expecting, though. Like, South Korea has a long, proud history of presidential coups and dictatorships, but you have to actually have the military on your side to do that. It doesn't just happen on its own. Trump did a coup and got reelected. I don't really see how you would think that, because Trump did the January 6th thing, but there wasn't any actual coup. Like, there wasn't any military attempt to decapitate the government. It was a bunch of boomers and streamers just going into the Capitol Hill building and taking some selfies and knocking over some barricades. That's about it. Like, there was no actual coup attempt. It was just a riot, more or less, completely disorganized. No, I wish that Trump was even 1/10 as badass as leftists think he was, because then at a minimum he would have already, like, what he should have been doing is purging the military of assets that are hostile to him, and then once the military is ideologically aligned with him, then he uses the military to coup the government. That's how you're supposed to do it. Like, trying to appeal to random boomers to rise up because of the disputed election is just completely asinine. It was stupid. What do Euro militaries do anyways? Well, they don't usually do much because they don't really exist as such, right? Like, what? Can you think of a single European military that has had any significance whatsoever? Other than, like, there's Russia and I guess Ukraine now, and then Turkey. And Turkey's not even really a European country, but, like, in terms of NATO, like, they're the only serious country in NATO other than America. European militaries, and it's funny because Europe has embarked on this political policy of crippling and demoralizing their men as much as possible. And it creates a situation where they are incapable of defending themselves because no one's going to die for these countries. And it's funny because I remember there was this interview. I should have found it. Well, I can't really pull it up on the fly, but there was this interview with, what was it? There was an interview in the UK, and this guy that was going around to these immigrants, like Pakistanis, Africans, and asking them if they would fight for England if Russia declared war or something, and they said, "Fuck no, I'd get the hell out. This isn't my country. I'm just here for the money." Like, they were actually saying this on camera, all of them. None of them were like, "Yeah, I would fight for this adoptive country that I was fortunate to get into." They were just like, "Fuck no, I'm just here for the money, man. I don't give a shit." You know, I don't know who they expect is going to fight for them, which is again also why Europe's political posturing is so absurd and delusional. Like, when I see Germany or I see England, for example, seizing Russian tankers in the sea, I think, do they think it's 1890? Like, what do they think? Who do they think they could win a conventional war against? I think maybe even Argentina could win against the UK now, to taking Malvinas is what the Argentines call it, those islands. Must be a manager selection for flag officers so chuds don't get into high positions. Yeah, Obama purged them all during his reign. That's how you got, like, Mark Milley, for example, in charge. Where he's talking about how we need to understand white rage or whatever, some DEI shit or like leftist shit. Anyways, guys, it's been 3 hours, so I think I'm going to shut down the stream now. I know I wasn't really able to plan as much for this one in terms of content. It was more like a stream of consciousness sort of thing. For Sunday, I'll have a little more time. It just so happened that I got today off, so I could finally squeeze one in. But we'll see how that goes. So it was great for y'all to come along, though, and interact. So talk to you guys later.